I could no longer focus on what Dumbledore was saying. The weight of my confession was too heavy. I pushed myself up from the chair and walked toward the door. I expected the corridor to be empty, allowing me to flee to the dormitory and mentally prepare for the fallout. But I stopped dead. My blood ran cold. There, standing rigid against the stone wall near the gargoyle, was my former self, Severus Snape. He was facing the door I had just closed. He was absolutely still, his expression carved from shock and silent fury. He had heard every word. I looked at him, terrified, knowing what that knowledge had done to me in a different lifetime. I remembered the earth-shattering feeling of collapse, the despair, the utter futility. I was afraid that, upon learning this, he would lose all hope. I stood frozen. He saw me. The expression on the black-robed professor's face shifted, the horror receding slightly, replaced by a strange, terrible sense of vindication. "Professor Snape, what are you doing at the door?" I asked, forcing caution into my voice, playing the role of the clumsy, caught student. I saw his struggle in his eyes. He endured it. He endured the reminder of his failure to protect Lily, the ultimate failure of his long atonement. He frowned impatiently, settling on the familiar facade. "I do not think Mr. Potter has the right to question a professor's whereabouts." "Yes, Professor," I agreed quickly, keeping my head slightly lowered. I knew he wanted confirmation of what he had just heard, but he was too proud to ask. He deliberately kept his face straight and said meanly, "Since you are fine now, it is time to process today's potion ingredients." He's pretending he didn't hear, I realized. Relief mingled with deep anxiety. I understand, Professor Snape." My face fell immediately, fulfilling the expectation of a student receiving detention. "The password is Snake Fang," he ground out through his teeth, saying the name of the basilisk's tooth with significant intent. "I still have to speak with Professor Dumbledore. I will check your progress when I return." He was sending me away so he could confirm the execution order with Albus. He gave me a final, deep, unreadable look before turning and entering the headmaster's office. I stood in the silence, letting the implications sink in. I didn't need to be in that room to know the conversation. "Severus, did you hear everything?" Dumbledore would ask. "What do you think?" I knew my former self would make a choice. He wouldn't allow himself the luxury of despair. He would loosen his grip on his wand and say dryly, "Do not worry. I promised you I would protect him, and I will. Even if Lily's son must eventually die." I knew he would look away, masking the complexity in his eyes. He wouldn't accept my fate. He would find a new purpose, keeping me alive. He would protect that child well, and then find a way to keep Potter from dying. But the best part was the revenge. Make Potter survive, and then he would properly humiliate Potter. Return all the embarrassment given to him. He would pretend he hadn't heard those words. He would see just how long I could endure and what other tricks I would use to deal with him. I let out a grim breath. Snape would sneer. He would be ready for whatever came his way. Snape turned and walked toward the dungeons, accepting his new, infinitely more complicated destiny. I returned late on Saturday night, dragging my exhausted body behind me. The lights in the dormitory were still out, and only Weasley was waiting for me. Deliberately not letting you relax even on Saturday. The old bat is becoming more and more abominable lately, Weasley cursed indignantly. He pointed to the sandwiches and pumpkin juice on the bedside table. "Eat up, Harry, you must be starving." "Actually, no. I felt a bit strange about it too," I said honestly. "Tonight, Professor Snape actually kept me in the dungeons for dinner." I recounted the subtle cruelty. While I continued processing beetle eyes for detention, he ordered mashed potatoes and bread, ignoring me completely, acting as if the food was just for display. I was starving, but he waited until I was almost collapsing before reluctantly mocking me. "Mr. Potter, have you forgotten how to eat?" That's what happened. I shrugged at Weasley. I lay back on the bed, a trace of uneasiness crossing my eyes. I still couldn't be sure if he had heard my confession to Dumbledore. The subtle shift in his attitude tonight, ordering food so I wouldn't starve, could be a coincidence, or it could be because of that incident. "Harry, this is a good thing anyway," Weasley comforted me against his conscience. "Although I don't know what happened between you two this term, but this is a good sign at least." I shook my head, just about to tell Weasley to stop being an idiot and accept that my former self would never be nice, when a loud, piercing explosion suddenly rang out in the room. Bang! "What happened?" Weasley jumped up in panic as if fitted with a spring. I sat up instantly as well, my wand already steadily raised in my hand, my expression serious. Strangely, the other three in the 5-person dormitory, Dean, Seamus, and Neville, were still deeply asleep, protected by some enchantment I didn't recognize. "It's Dobby." When I saw the elf standing on the floor between the two beds, I finally understood. "Good evening, Mr. Harry Potter," Dobby squeaked, bowing deeply to me again. "That's him, the house elf you said might have intercepted all letters from me and Hermione during the summer?" Weasley leaned over hurriedly. "He looks a bit miserable." Dobby's appearance was truly wretched. His ears were red and swollen, his thin arms scarred, his pillowcase tattered. "Mr. Harry Potter, Dobby had such a hard time seeing you." Dobby's excited voice was high-pitched. "Master has kept Dobby locked up at home since then, forbidding Dobby to come to find Harry Potter." "Then how did you come again?" Weasley interrupted. Dobby punished himself severely because Dobby disobeyed orders." The elf raised his arm to show the scars. "But it's all worth it. Dobby must come to warn Mr. Harry Potter that he cannot stay at Hogwarts any longer." I sensed the danger. I darkened my face to stop Dobby's wailing. "Wait, I have something to show you." Sitting on the bed, I first waved my wand and silently recited a string of spells, a quick silencing charm over the room to contain the sound. Then I opened my backpack and took out the black diary. The diary was completely pierced by a hole, its edges charred and burned. I held it up for Dobby to see clearly. "Is this the danger you were referring to? Someone put this diary into the school and then tried to manipulate a basilisk to come out." "The diary!" Dobby seemed choked for a moment. "That's it!" "Mr. Harry Potter, did you do this?" The elf was almost moved to tears of admiration. "Yes," I gave a small smile, then retracted it, placing the diary in Dobby's hands. I was genuinely curious whether Lucius knew the diary contained their old master. "Harry Potter is truly amazing," Dobby agreed without hesitation. "Dobby will do it. By the way, pass on a message for me." I pondered for a moment before raising my eyelids. The soul in the diary said his name was Tom Riddle. This was calculated. Whether Lucius knew or not, he would definitely investigate the Dark Lord's real name. An unexpected surprise for the Ministry, perhaps. "Dobby understands. Then goodbye, Mr. Harry Potter." Dobby bowed respectfully, looked up at me excitedly, and vanished with a loud crack. "Whew," Weasley breathed a sign of relief, but was also confused. "Harry, isn't this your diary? A soul in the diary? Manipulating a basilisk? What happened?" I had no choice but to grasp the key points and tell Weasley roughly, downplaying the seriousness. Thinking about having to tell Granger the same thing tomorrow morning and accepting her fussy scolding, identical to Madame Pomfrey's, I felt a headache coming. Monday's classes were what I hated most right now. The 2 classes on Monday were troubles I couldn't escape no matter what. Gilderoy Lockhart. "Harry, you stay, we can chat some more." The man with the bright, flashy smile called out to me as soon as he announced the end of class. "Sorry, Professor, I have things to do." I frowned and refused. I was fed up with his endless chattering and attempts at self-promotion. "Shy, aren't you? Harry, look at you. You should be more confident like me." Professor Lockhart ignored my reluctance, pulling me towards his office. "Professor Lockhart, Harry really has things to do," Ron chimed in quickly. Granger hesitated silently on the side. Caught between friend and idol, she found it hard to choose. "If Potter were like you, I fear he would never need a Lumos spell again." A familiar mocking voice rang out. It was my former self, Snape, passing by, raising an eyebrow as if watching a good show. "Even professors like you so much, Potter. Your fame is truly hot." My heart stirred. He appeared very frequently recently. Was it deliberately to find an opportunity to pick on me?
Severus! Lockhart turned around and greeted Snape with a bright smile. Stop scolding. Harry is already very shy. Want to come along now, Severus? We were just heading back to the office to reply to my readers with postcards. My face darkened almost simultaneously with his. No, Snape refused coldly, turning to leave with a flick of his robes. After just 2 steps, he suddenly stopped again, slowly turning back to look at me with a malicious gaze. Snape drawled, I recall. Last Saturday, you only came to the dungeons to study for half a day. Is that right, Potter? If I remember correctly, you have no classes for the last 2 periods on Monday. My eyes lit up. He was giving me an out. But before I could say anything, I was interrupted by Lockhart's laughter. Oh, Severus, you really are a fool. Given such an opportunity, which student wouldn't want to go write postcards with me? For boring things like studying potions, it's better if students are willing. Snape's mouth twisted. His face turned completely black with the double offense. Afraid he would turn and leave in anger, I quickly broke free from Lockhart's grip. Of course I'm willing, I said coldly. Actually, compared to writing postcards all afternoon senselessly like a fool, I'd rather fill my brain with some knowledge. Snape raised an eyebrow, his complexion improving slightly. Lockhart's expression froze in disbelief. I walked to Snape's side, then turned back to raise an eyebrow at Lockhart. This expression, this aura, was identical to Snape beside me. Also, I want to kindly remind you of one thing, Professor Lockhart. I'm afraid I'll never learn a single bit of knowledge from you. I mocked. Daring to bully himself. I couldn't resist secretly casting a small jinx at Lockhart as we walked away.
The two turned to leave and immediately heard a thud from behind. Professor Lockhart, are you all right? Hermione exclaimed. I'm fine. Don't worry, Granger. Just the floor is a bit slippery. Lockhart stood up wretchedly, smiling with a fresh bruise darkening his face. Thud! Professor Lockhart! Hermione was even more worried. I'm fine, just lost my footing. It's nothing, silly girl. The smile on Lockhart's face faltered, wincing in pain. A second bruise, perfectly symmetrical to the first, now adorned his other cheek where he had just hit it. I raised an eyebrow and looked up at Snape's expression with a guilty conscience. Playing tricks right in front of Snape, who was an expert in the dark arts, I really didn't have the confidence to go unnoticed. But what reassured me was that Snape just glanced back lightly, scoffed, and continued walking without commenting. I subtly felt, maybe even if the vengeful Snape found out, he would pretend not to see. Didn't you see his expression soften considerably again? He was distracted and he approved of Lockhart's misery. The two of us were very silent along the way. Snape strode ahead with large steps. Although I was used to such a pace, my legs were now significantly shorter, so I could only trot to keep up. It wasn't until we reached the entrance hall on the first floor and were about to go down to the dungeons that Snape discreetly scanned the surroundings. He confirmed there were no portraits or passing ghosts. He slowed down, ready to settle scores. Potter. What is it, Professor? I also keenly realized the environment was suitable for talking. Snape's expression was a half smile, and his voice suddenly softened. Could you please explain? That velvety voice was soft and pleasant. I couldn't help but hold my breath to listen carefully. What does it mean by, you are the Snape that both Harry and Abby are fighting to like? Snape asked methodically. I stiffened. That was what Tom Riddle said. He just said it in passing. How did Snape remember it? Not answering? Snape crossed his arms leisurely, looking at my speechlessness with pleasure. Then I can change the question. Tell me, who is Abby? Being questioned by Snape about whom I was fighting over him with, I was so embarrassed and annoyed I almost wanted to bury my head in the ground. Did I dare to say that person was also myself? Seeing me still not answering, Snape wasn't angry. Instead, his mood improved even more. Potter, I never thought you had such a hobby. Snape drawled, mocking me triumphantly in a sympathetic tone. If your head has been turned by that immense yet useless fame to the point of schizophrenia, Potter, I suggest you visit the hospital wing sooner rather than later, he said with schadenfreude in a strange voice suppressing laughter. I will provide you with potions, don't worry. Snape found it extremely amusing just thinking about that scene. It was just a pity he couldn't know how I had deceived Tom Riddle. Thanks, no need, I said dryly with a dark face, feeling a complicated emotions of shame and annoyance. To change the subject, I hurriedly searched for words in my mind and finally came up with the outline of a plan. Professor Snape, could I ask you for a favor?
When does the famous Potter also need, well, what favor? Snape abandoned his half-finished mockery and answered smoothly, though he tried to make himself appear less willing. It's like this. Could you please ask all the students to bring their pets to the next class, Professor? I revealed the plan I had temporarily thought of, a flash of disgust in my eyes. Because Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, is Peter Pettigrew. Snape's expression froze. His face darkened rapidly, and unable to control his emotions, he grabbed me by the collar. Impossible! Why would he turn into a rat and hide outside for so many years? Everyone thinks he's dead to this day. Of course, it's because he is the one who killed them. Sirius Black is not, I said gloomily. Seeing Snape looking unusually dazed and stricken, I grabbed the hand he used to hold my collar and lowered my voice and said through gritted teeth, "Listen to me. In class, pretend to notice something wrong with Scabbers. Find an excuse to control it and then take it to the headmaster's office. Then I will explain the plan to Professor Dumbledore. Simply put, clarify this matter, force Peter into a desperate situation, and then let him escape. Professor Snape, we need him to escape." I finished in one breath, then suddenly became vague. This is about another Horcrux. Snape barely composed himself. Coming back to his senses to look at me, he immediately keenly realized that this plan was actually about my own survival. Okay, I understand. Snape's voice was flat. He released his grip on my collar, turned his head away, his hand disappearing into his wide black robes. I was certain Snape was clenching his fist to suppress his emotions, but I couldn't say more now. I could only tell those plans to Dumbledore. In Wednesday's potions class, Snape followed the plan well, finding an excuse to put Scabbers the rat to sleep and take it to the headmaster's office. I went with him. "Professor Snape, you can go back to class now," I dismissed him tactfully. "I can tell the plan to Professor Dumbledore." Snape gave me a deep look. His gaze swept over Dumbledore beside him and agreed very calmly. It was useless. Even if I didn't want him to know the plan, Dumbledore would tell him. Snape turned and strode away. I watched the black back disappear around the corner outside the door before sighing and explaining my plan to Dumbledore. When Peter Pettigrew was driven into a corner, he would bring his old master back, and then Voldemort would plot his resurrection. In other words, as long as Voldemort doesn't die, you won't die, and Dumbledore said with some realization. And at the same time, as long as you don't die, the Horcrux inside you won't die, so Voldemort will never die. The plan was simple. If it succeeded, Voldemort would use my blood to resurrect. Then when he tried to kill me again, the killing curse would hit both me and the Horcrux inside me simultaneously. And given the condition that I wouldn't die as long as Voldemort lived, the only thing that would die would be the Horcrux inside me. This plan is very comprehensive, but I have a question. Since the plan has no loopholes, why did the future you return here? Because I failed, I said vaguely, feeling somewhat anxious. I died, so I came back. I didn't know why Harry Potter had died back then, so this time I wanted to know what exactly should be done to defeat Voldemort and win the final battle. Dumbledore's expression instantly became heavy and complex. There shouldn't be any problem with this plan, I said hurriedly. Even if there is, this is the only path we can try now. I understand, Dumbledore said with a mix of gratification and guilt. I will contact the Ministry of Magic as soon as possible to reopen the case of Sirius Black, striving to get him out early so he can come see you. My expression froze. What? Wait. Why does as soon as possible? I didn't... Dumbledore looked at me kindly and smiled. You didn't know, did you? Sirius is your godfather. Harry, you must be looking forward to seeing your godfather, aren't you? Dumbledore asked with a chuckle. I did indeed am looking forward to it. Sorry, Professor, I am just too excited. I gritted my teeth and spoke against my conscience, my voice almost sounding like I was crying. Professor Dumbledore, can you let him recover before coming? I would be very worried if he came out before recovering his health. What did he mean by Dumbledore contacting the Ministry of Magic again to get Sirius Black out early to see me? Let that stupid dog come to plague me sooner. And I had to call Black Godfather? I'd rather call myself Godfather than call that brainless guy Godfather.
Once the plan began to be implemented, it proceeded at a speed I found incredibly resistant. Almost all the front pages of the Daily Prophet this week were about Sirius Black being innocently released, the real culprit turning out to be Peter Pettigrew, recipient of the Order of Merlin First Class.
Harry, the paper says he's also your godfather? Weasley curiously read the newspaper while piling fried eggs and sausages onto his plate. Sirius Black, who was with Harry Potter's father in their youth? Scurry! I couldn't stop myself from scraping my fork across my plate, creating a piercing sound that interrupted Weasley. Harry? Hermione sensitively felt that my expression wasn't quite right. Don't you like him? She asked cautiously. Weasley also worriedly put down his chicken leg and looked over. I glanced up at the staff table. Dumbledore was looking at me concerned. Although my former self didn't look over, he seemed suddenly interested in the Gryffindor table's ghost, staring fixedly at nearly headless Nick. Nick was almost sweating under the scrutiny. I could only take a deep breath, pretending to be tired and covering my forehead, hiding most of the expression on my face. No, I'm just a little unhappy. Unhappy, Hermione repeated. I originally just wanted to find an excuse, but after saying it, I had a flash of inspiration and decisively continued along that line. That's right, unhappy. Even though he is I decisively skipped over that title, a hint of resentment in my voice. But I spent so many years at my aunt's house without even knowing of his existence. Since he was wronged, why didn't he speak up? Why did he stay in prison for so long, letting the real culprit roam free? Where was he when I was dizzy with hunger? Hermione and Ron looked at each other and instantly understood my fabricated grievance. They didn't continue the conversation. I covered my face and continued. I acted very happy when Professor Dumbledore asked me, but actually I still can't call him by that title. I still can't accept him, but I dare not say these thoughts out loud. I gagged at myself inwardly. Despite the conversation that morning, a few days later, Professor Dumbledore sent me a message asking me to come to the headmaster's office immediately. It was serious. The stupid dog couldn't stay in St. Mungo's any longer and insisted on coming to Hogwarts to see his godson. When I walked into the headmaster's office expressionlessly, I found Dumbledore smiling at me reassuringly. At least I didn't have to pretend to be extremely excited and have a tearful reunion with the dog. I breathed a sigh of relief. Harry! A figure, gaunt and haggard but dressed in new robes, rushed over almost the moment I stepped into the headmaster's office. Sirius Black. The man's voice was filled with excitement and joy, almost choking up. He rushed over and hugged me tightly. So alike, exactly like your father. I knew it! I knew it! My expression twisted immediately. Sirius lowered his head, stroking my face, his voice incoherent. Harry, look at this hair, exactly like your father's. Your father loved to mess up his hair back then, to attract girls. Your mother. Your eyes look exactly like your mother's too, so beautiful. Harry, honestly, seeing you is like seeing James. My expression almost cracked. Unable to push Black away, I could only suppress the urge to vomit while being filled with talk about how much you look like your father. Enduring the creepy treatment of Black touching my face, my complexion slowly turned green. All right, Sirius. Seeing my face looking terrible, Dumbledore quickly smoothed over the situation. Let go of Harry first. He can hardly breathe. Oh, sorry. Sirius let go immediately, as if electrocuted, looking at me concerned. Is that so? I said dryly. Haha, that's nice. Sirius looked at me hopefully, waiting very awkwardly for a title or something. I kept my face straight, pretending not to notice. Dumbledore had to intervene again. Sirius, you've just met. Harry is still not quite used to it. You insisted on seeing Harry earlier, and now you should go back to St. Mungo's. I've only been here a few minutes. Sirius looked at Dumbledore pitifully. Go for a walk. Sirius hasn't been back to Hogwarts in a long time. You can talk some more. Dumbledore smiled and said to me, Yes, Professor. I smiled through gritted teeth. I turned and strode aggressively out of the headmaster's office, my movement flicking the school robes into billowing waves, exactly like Snape. Sirius prepared to follow, but hesitated. He lowered his voice and asked Dumbledore worriedly, Albus, does Harry not like me very much? Dumbledore shrugged and tactfully revealed the situation to him. Harry grew up at his aunt's house. You know, muggles can be a bit towards little wizards. So Harry might have some grievances about you only now claiming to be his godfather. His aunt's house. Sirius muttered thoughtfully. That weird sister of Lily's. Did she abuse Harry? Harry looks so thin. No, I have to go ask. Thinking about it briefly, Sirius' anger flared up instantly. Anxious and worried, he hurriedly chased after me. Harry! Harry! Wait for me! In the castle corridor, I strode ahead and Sirius followed closely behind, looking particularly awkward and helpless. Harry, what do you like? Sirius thought for a long time before trying to find a topic. I can bring you a gift next time I come. No need, I said coldly. When facing Sirius alone, I didn't even want to fake a smile. Why, Harry? I'm your godfather. I know I came back too late, which I must say sorry, but I'm sincere. Don't be polite with me. Sirius tried hard to explain. Whatever you like. Harry, I'll definitely buy it for you. How about a firebolt or a pensieve? I don't like any of these. I interrupted him abruptly, my expression suddenly becoming somewhat gloomy. What I like, if I tell you, you will definitely despise me. I thought of a brilliant way to take revenge on Black. What? Sirius swore to Rurlin. Whatever you like, I definitely won't despise it. Harry, don't worry. Even if it's some contraband item, just tell me. Your dad was quite mischievous back then. Really? I thought to suppress a weird smile, showing a hopeful expression. Really? Sirius tried to put on a serious and convincing expression. All right, actually, I like potions. Potions? Liking potions is good. It's hereditary. You're just like your mother. I also like Slytherin. Am I weird? Even though my whole family is Gryffindor? Like Slytherin. Sirius's expression also twisted a bit, but he reacted immediately, trying hard to twist his expression back into a smile, comforting his godson openly and loudly. So what? No need to worry about that at all. Harry, let me tell you a little secret. Sirius pressed my shoulders, squatting in front of me so we were eye level. Actually, my family is all Slytherin. I'm the only Gryffindor. So Harry, this is not a problem at all. Is that so? I feigned realization, but frowned tightly, continuing hesitantly. But I also like what else? Sirius looked encouragingly at me. I raised an eyebrow maliciously and stammered, I also like Professor Snape. He's the head of Slytherin, and I heard he didn't get along with you guys before, but I really, really like him. Is this okay too? What does it matter? Just liking the head of Slytherin. Wait, Harry, you actually have someone you like? That's cool. Your dad also set his sights on your... As soon as school started. Sirius's voice stopped abruptly. The smile on his face froze completely. Professor Snape. I looked at him innocently and seriously. Snivelous? No, absolutely not this. Harry, no.
And so, on the morning Sirius Black came to visit his godson, a major event occurred at Hogwarts. According to the Slytherin and Gryffindor students who were in potions class at the time, that famous figure, Sirius Black, suddenly kicked open the door to the dungeon classroom. He rushed in, swinging his fists to punch Professor Snape, shouting something with a ferocious expression. Hanging from his waist, I was clinging tightly to his arm. Snivelous, Sirius shouted with heartfelt sorrow. I treated you as a mortal enemy, and you actually tried to abduct my godson? His roar echoed alone in the vast dungeon classroom. All the students were instantly terrified into silence. Fortunately, Snape reacted quickly. As Sirius rushed in and threw a punch, Snape immediately stumbled back a few steps to dodge, reflexively drawing his wand. Well, isn't this Black? Snape stood firm not far away, then asked sinisterly, with a dark face, instead of having a touching reunion with your godson, what are you doing in my classroom? Of course I came to question you. Wait, don't fight, I immediately interrupted Sirius, shouting anxiously. I clung tightly to Sirius's waist and arm, looking anxiously at the Black figure. I knew exactly what to say to mask the real issue. Professor Snape, I'm sorry, he didn't finish listening and was too angry, so I couldn't stop him. I then said somewhat gloomily to Sirius, Actually, it's me who likes... Well, Professor Snape naturally dismisses me. Snape's expression changed subtly. My explanation was simply adding fuel to the fire. Sirius's anger grew even more intense, his face distorted with rage as he roared, "Snivelous, you actually look down on Harry?" He struggled desperately to draw his wand, but was held tight by me around the waist. He could only stand there, eyes spitting fire, questioning ferociously, "What's wrong with my Harry? Such a well-behaved child, likes potions, and handsome too. You actually look down on him? Snivelous, don't go too far. Don't look at yourself. Look at that nose of yours. Isn't there a toad lying on it?" Silence. Snape's face also twisted terribly. The whole class was silent as cicadas in winter, staring at their potions professor, not daring to breathe. "Don't talk about him like that," I protested angrily, glaring at Sirius with fire in my eyes. Snape's ugly expression eased slightly. Vindication, I thought. "Harry, how about you like someone else?" Sirius asked, huffingly, once we were out in the corridor. "Snivel, what exactly is good about Snape? He clearly has no merits, and he's ugly." I quickly looked back at the many students pretending to be statues in the dungeon classroom, dragged Sirius further away, then began to protest angrily. Professor Snape is a potions master and an occlumency master, and he's not ugly. At the very least, I like his nose the most. The students in the dungeon classroom probably turned pale as my voice praising Professor Snape faded into the distance. During the half hour I dragged Sirius back to the headmaster's office, Sirius tried earnestly to persuade me the whole way. But even though he worried until his hair was about to fall out, I remained steadfast on liking Professor Snape and wouldn't budge. Until finally, I pulled a face and completely ignored Sirius in annoyance. Only then did Sirius panic, throwing Snape to the back of his mind, solely focused on coaxing his godson not to be angry. "Ooh, look at this!" Sirius trotted a few steps, ingraciously cutting in front of me, and then suddenly shrunk down, abruptly turning into a large black dog within seconds. Woof! The large black dog barked happily, pounced suddenly, knocking me to the ground, and nuzzled his face with his furry head. Merlin's pants! It was my first time being so intimate with a live animal. Scared, my expression twisted again, struggling desperately to dodge the black dog's tongue. "Go away! Get up!" The large black dog thought I was just being distant and shy, so it continued to run and jump, shaking its head, having a great time. "Sirius Black!" I shouted in a breakdown through gritted teeth, my face ashen, so embarrassed I was about to cry. "Let me down!" The large black dog thought I was just being distant and shy, so it continued to run and jump. "Godfather!" I finally couldn't bear it anymore and shouted through clenched teeth, "I said stop!" The effect of this title was immediate. The large black dog stiffened and turned back into the gaunt young man almost instantly. "What did you call me, Harry?" Sirius's face was full of joy, his expression filled with disbelief. "Sly..." I looked at him with despair, my eyes numb, not wanting to speak. Sirius, his dark gray eyes were almost shining. He hugged me and laughed loudly. "What did you call me just now, Harry? Say it again!" A helpless silence. "Say it, Harry," Sirius looked at me hopefully, persevering. I, giving up, could only murmur weakly, "Dog Godfather." "A," he agreed readily, not minding the title at all. "Harry, you seem a bit too quiet and shy." Sirius squatted down, hugging me tightly in his arms, and said gently, "Boys should be a bit more lively. It's okay to be mischievous. I used to play with me like that often when you were little. Don't feel embarrassed." "All right, if you made me angry, actually, I just wanted to close the distance between us. I'm sorry, Harry." His warm cheek pressed against my face. I struggled resistantly a few times, but couldn't break free. It seemed some wet traces slid down past my ear as I heard Sirius sigh and whisper, "Because today, I am really too happy. I really want to make up for all the emptiness of these past dozen years, Harry." I turned my face away uncomfortably, twitched my mouth for a long time, then said half disdainfully and half helplessly, "All right then. I won't ask for much, just one thing. I stated my condition. You are not allowed to stop me from liking Professor Snape." "That won't do." Sirius instantly changed from a gentle, fatherly face back to a fierce, vicious dog look. I immediately glared at Sirius angrily. "You should go back to St. Mungo's." This time, it was Sirius's turn to look miserable. He pleaded, "Harry, can't you like someone else? I think even Professor Lockhart is better than him. How am I supposed to explain this to Lily and James?" "You really think Lockhart is better than Professor Snape?" I raised an eyebrow in disbelief and questioned him. He silenced for seconds, then decisively changed the candidate. "How about liking that little friend of yours? I remember his name is Ron." I shuddered and refused decisively. "I don't like boys. I like Professor Snape." Sirius clutched his head, unable to accept it, and wailed, "James will definitely kill me." I raised my eyebrow and lightly added another straw. "Actually, I know Professor Snape won't like me.
I just want to call him Severus. I'll be satisfied just hearing him answer. If this wish can be fulfilled, I won't say anything more, I said with a voice full of grievance, though my eyes held a hint of smile. Sirius wailed even louder, holding his head. He wiped his face while screaming, then turned around to ask bitterly and hopefully, "Really? Just need him to answer once?" "That's right," I nodded with a fake smile. "Will you help me until I hear him answer?" Sirius's face looked as if he had swallowed a huge fly, yet he had to nod with a face of grief and indignation, looking like he was about to cry, and with a look of death-defying determination firmer than staying in Azkaban for 10 years, mustered his courage, grit his teeth, and said, "I will help you pursue."
Listen well, Harry. Sirius suddenly perked up again, boasting, "I am very experienced in pursuing people." I immediately cast him a skeptical look. Did he not know his own situation? Black never lacked admirers. His girlfriends changed every few days. He had never actively pursued anyone. Harry, don't doubt it. Sirius was a bit unconvinced. I was the one who helped your dad win over your mom back then. I fought back the urge to point out that he was actually more of a hindrance. This was exactly what I needed. I forced back the expression of having swallowed a fly and nodded reluctantly. All right, continue. First, you need to have something that can attract him, Sirius said. Harry, you don't need to worry about this point. You are already very handsome. I clutched my stomach, unwilling to comment on this self-worship. Clearly that's snivelous. That Snape is good for nothing, yet he dares to disdain you? Seeing me immediately glaring unhappily, he quickly apologized. Okay, sorry. I won't talk about him. Let's continue. Sirius looked worried. Since looks can't attract him, then Harry, you need a little technique. Come, copy me. He turned sideways, stood in a languid pose, raised one hand to mess with his black hair foolishly, then turned his face, grinned revealing neat teeth, winked at me flirtatiously, and flashed a charmingly brilliant smile. I shuddered in horror. See, Harry, this was the trick your dad used to woo your mum back then. Fully demonstrate your excellence, although it's a bit of a waste on Snape, but Harry, electrocute him with your eyes. So this was why the elder Potter looked like he was having an eye spasm whenever he saw Lily. I think... Better not, I refused, dryly with exhaustion. My stomach was starting to hurt. I was beginning to regret using this excuse to take revenge on Black. Now I was the one grossed out first. All right, Sirius surrendered. Maybe these don't work on Snape. He's always so weird and unlikable. But there's one move I guarantee it will work on him. What is it? I asked pessimistically. Feigning weakness, Sirius whispered conspiratorially. Harry, don't underestimate this move. Back then, every time that guy used this move, Lily would ignore James for days. Truly insidious and cunning, specifically picking times when Lily was present. I looked at him coldly. What nonsense! I was weak because your pack of dunderheads was ganging up on me. Oblivious to my internal rage, Sirius continued. So, Harry, if you feign weakness appropriately, maybe you'll attract his attention. After all, this is his own trick. I thought out the specific process too. We'll try it later at noon with your friends. Harry, is it true that you just need to hear him answer once and you won't like him anymore after that? Sirius confirmed urgently. Yes, after all, Professor Snape won't like me. I lowered my head, feigning a gloomy expression. Sirius muttered, I'll settle the score with Snivelus after this is over. Snape hadn't intended to go to the Great Hall for lunch. He was thinking of me and my godfather having a touching and affectionate exchange. It made him feel sick. He didn't want to look for trouble. But after hearing rumors about Harry Potter's twisted taste, his mood worsened. After returning gloomily to his potions office, his gaze fell again on the row of wound potions I had brewed. Da-da-da-da. Snape's expression was unpredictable for a moment of silence, then he turned and went out. Even if Potter wanted to be close to that stupid dog, it couldn't cover up the fact that Potter liked him. Snape's mouth twisted into a malicious smile. He decided to go to the Great Hall. The one uncomfortable wouldn't be him, it would only be Black. But the atmosphere was unusual. Students were whispering. Harry Potter, his godfather, arguing outside. Snape was startled, and his expression became grave. He walked quickly towards the castle's main doors. Faint sounds of arguing reached his ears. Hermione Granger's familiar voice rang out sharp and high, sounding very angry. "Harry, we really can't stand it anymore." "Your godfather is right," Ron Weasley chimed in from the side. "Harry, I've heard about your life at school from your friends," Sirius Black condemned with heartfelt sorrow. "That guy targets you every day, making your classmates isolate you and always punishing you with detention. You haven't had a few days off in a whole term. This is abuse. Why on earth do you still like him?" I heard all three voices. I, Harry Potter, remained silent, head lowered wordlessly. This was the feigning weakness setup. "Harry, your godfather is right. Although we've always wanted to help you, it's really not worth it." Hermione shook her head. "And the Gryffindor students have isolated us for a year. I really can't take it anymore," Ron said gloomily. Sirius crossed his arms and nodded in solidarity. Before he could think much, Snape pressed his lips together in annoyance. This bunch of brainless idiots, leaving that stupid dog aside, weren't Hermione and Ron my friends? How could they treat me like this? Snape's face darkened, and he strode aggressively in their direction. He was angry at the wrong people for the wrong reasons.
"Well, what a touching conversation, Potter." Snape strode aggressively towards them, robes billowing, but slowed down as he approached, speaking in an unctuous tone. He curled his lip briefly at me, then dropped it, asking sarcastically, "Making a huge racket outside the castle, preventing half the school from eating in peace? What is this about?" Snape, this is none of your business." Sirius glared at him, taking the bait instantly. "Professor Snape, we were just—" "Shut your mouth, Granger. I only want to hear Potter's explanation," Snape hissed, narrowing his eyes. He completely ignored the other three, as if they were invisible, looking down at me with a gloomy face. My lips moved, I looked at the three people beside me, then at himself in front of me, bracing myself, but still didn't say a word. Merlin's pants. Black's terrible idea actually worked? This was impossible. Seeing me picked on by my godfather, shouldn't he be gloating and even happier? I needed to know, was he just gloating, or was he truly angry at me for the Hedwig incident? Ah, I understand. Seeing me looking listless and still silent, Snape narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping another degree colder, laced with dangerous implications. "Weasley, Granger, for deliberately obstructing other students from dining, 1 week of detention with Filch." Their faces fell immediately, and they agreed dejectedly. "No points deducted this time?" I gave him a perplexed and strange glance. Snape, however, misunderstood my look. He gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes, seemingly disappointed in my pity for my friends. "Potter, don't pity them. Worry about yourself first. It just so happens a new batch of potion ingredients has arrived. I want to see the processed finished products within a week. No failure allowed. And if too many ingredients are damaged, you wouldn't want to know the consequences." "Snape, you're taking the opportunity to retaliate against Harry," Sirius shouted furiously. "I am merely exercising the normal rights of a professor." Snape maintained his fake smile. The look I gave myself became even stranger. Despite his severe tone, a week was the normal time to process that batch of ingredients. He was just performing for the audience. "As for you, a non-school person," Snape looked at Sirius airily, "you have no right to criticize my actions." "Snape, you—" He wanted to roar something, but turned to look at me, switching tactics. "Harry, wake up! Look! What on earth is worth liking about this kind of person?" According to the plan, I just needed to lower my head and stay silent. But seeing the sheer aggression on his face at that moment, alarm bells rang in my mind. He wasn't just performing, he was genuinely angry about something. The feigning weakness plan was too dangerous now. Yes, I'll listen to you. I don't like him anymore. Question mark? Sirius, Hermione, and Ron were stunned by this unexpected turn of events. For a moment, all the venomous sarcasm Snape had prepared was choked back in his throat. He glared at me in disbelief. Then he immediately snared, not to be outdone. Potter, that really is a relief to hear. Terrifying. Just thinking that a Potter might like me, I can't even sleep peacefully. He crossed his arms, mocking, sarcastically, in an extremely mean tone. Sirius quickly looked at me. He had been secretly rejoicing that I might not like Snivelus anymore, but now he began to worry if I was hurt by such words. I, however, stole a glance at Snake's current expression, then swept my gaze over the 3 people beside me in turn. The alarm bells in my heart finally stopped ringing. I kept a straight face, as if I hadn't heard, breathed a sigh of relief, and reverted to a cold demeanor. I don't like him anymore, so you can rest assured. Fool myself first. I could smooth over the revenge on Black later. Snape narrowed his eyes in displeasure, ready to retort again, but suddenly calmed down. He knew. Hadn't he known for a long time? He knew why Potter was so cold to him, why I was dedicated to angering him repeatedly, making our relationship as bad as possible. He knew I was bearing that secret alone. Potter had almost succeeded again. He had been vigilant for so long, and now little Potter finally made a move to protect him by denying the crush entirely. Snape pressed his lips tightly together. He saw 4 people targeting me. He saw my best friends betraying me. He stopped thinking about it. His face still wore that mean expression, crossing his arms nonchalantly, but his words silently veered back from mockery to defense. Potter, who you like is none of my business. Go back to the Great Hall immediately. Weasley, Granger, since you don't plan to eat, your detention starts now. Go find Filch. He had punished the 3 people opposing me, clearing the path, while giving me a simple task and ordering me to eat. Ron immediately pulled a long face, wanting to complain, but silenced himself under Snape's half-smiling gaze. Not until he was dragged away by Hermione and entered the castle did he dare to protest in a whisper, "Why can't Harry eat?" "Don't be silly," Hermione shook her head. "Are you two the same?" "Although today's actions came with a price," Hermione sighed. Summarizing the situation for Ron, "The mission should be considered accomplished, right? Look at Professor Snape's expression just now." Like an old hen protecting its chick.
I remained outside the castle, looking at Sirius, and gave him a subtle hint. "You, should go back. Come back when you've recovered your health." Sirius had wanted to cling to his godson, but upon seeing the gloomy figure of Snape beside me, he suddenly realized the need for a dramatic exit. He put on an expression of tragic indignation, transformed into the large black dog, and ran away. I twitched the corner of my mouth silently. Good riddance. Snape raised an eyebrow beside me, crossed his arms, and hissed a question. "Not going to chase after your godfather?" There was no sarcasm in his sentence. It sounded quite genuine. This sudden considerate attitude towards Harry Potter terrified me again for a moment. It seemed that when it was just the 2 of us, all the prickliness about Snape would be retracted. But I had business to attend to now. "No," I said simply. Snape raised an eyebrow again, looking somewhat pleased. I had a growing sense of foreboding in my heart, but I had to brace myself and test the waters. Snape started walking towards the castle, and I hurriedly followed. For a time, the 2 of us walked side by side in silence, the atmosphere oddly harmonious. He didn't mock me along the way, nor did he mention when the potion ingredients needed to be processed. I struggled with my thoughts for quite a while. Seeing that we were about to return to the Great Hall for dinner, I finally grit my teeth and made up my mind. I stopped abruptly, clenched my fists, and called out dryly, lacking confidence, "Severus?" Snape jerked. He immediately turned his head with an unfathomable expression, looking down at me. I pursed my lips tightly and said no more, staring straight at him, solely waiting for his reaction. Snape's expression looked severe yet indifferent. I expected his thin lips to twist into a mean arc, mocking me ruthlessly. But he said nothing. He maintained that expression as if he might explode at any moment, his obsidian-like eyes gazing silently at me. After a long time,
Snape looked away and said flatly, "If you have something to say, say it." Shh! My face distorted immediately. He actually acquiesced. He tacitly accepted a Potter calling him by his given name again. Not a single word of scolding. This was absolutely unacceptable. That lousy idea actually succeeded completely. But fortunately, Black wasn't here right now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to take revenge on him later. My brain began to whir rapidly. I would have to smooth over the statement about not liking Snape anymore, and then modify the condition of calling him Severus and getting a response. I looked thoughtful. "Potter?" Snape's impatient voice called my mind back. "Huh? Speak if you have something to say," Snape repeated, crossing his arms. I didn't actually have anything to say. I forced myself to look calm while facing him, racking my brain to recall a viable distraction. In a moment of quick wit, I said, "How about organizing a dueling club?" "What?" Snape frowned, not quite catching that. "A dueling club," I said more smoothly once the words were out, "to teach students how to defend themselves in emergencies and such. It could count as a special activity for this year." Snape's expression immediately turned sour and pricked me lightly. "Mr. Potter, tell me, is your brain filled with water? Otherwise, why do I hear it gurgling loudly at such an inopportune time?" I looked at Snape calmly and added, "Two professors could fight a demonstration match first. I think Professor Lockhart wouldn't certainly refuse your invitation." Snape's eyebrows slowly rose. He understood the underlying venom. He said in a smooth, oily voice, "Wouldn't that be a bit improper to treat a professor that way?" My eyebrows raised in exactly the same manner, and I said with ill intent, "But Professor Lockhart always likes to steal the spotlight, doesn't he?" The cunning smile at the corner of Snape's mouth widened. He nodded reservedly, his cello-like voice praising me seemingly casually. "Good idea." Only then was I satisfied. In my previous life, Lockhart had organized this so-called dueling club, and I had gone to be the partner most unwillingly. Fortunately, I caused Lockhart to lose face greatly, which allowed me to vent my anger. This time, vengeance for both Lockhart's pestering and his feigned disrespect for Snape could be taken at once. I narrowed my eyes as I thought. I wouldn't forget, I had always been a very petty person.
The application for the dueling club, jointly hosted by my former self and Professor Lockhart, was approved by Headmaster Dumbledore as soon as it was submitted. The time was set for this Thursday. Tonight was no exception. I sat habitually in Snape's head of house office, processing the newly arrived potion ingredients. I came here almost every night now, and my attitude had become relaxed and at ease. I knew where to get the ingredients, where the chair was kept, and where my dedicated gloves and towel were placed. It was so familiar, as if I wasn't there for detention, but processing materials in my own private lab. I was aware of him scrutinizing me with an unobtrusive gaze. He was aware that I was familiar with his office from the very start. He was obsessed with the mystery. Did always together mean what he thought it meant? Did his current cold attitude truly not hurt the boy? He held his quill in annoyance for a long time without grading a single assignment, his eyes filled with complexity. "Professor Snape, if you are tired, go rest for a while," I suddenly spoke without looking up. "There is nothing urgent right now. Using pepper-up potion all the time isn't good." "No need." He immediately snapped back to reality and answered in a deep voice, continuing to mark grades on the parchment with his quill. I had cared about him again, and I knew he used pepper-up potion frequently. His quill paused. I saw his expression soften for a fleeting moment, and he gave the assignment an A. The room fell into silence again, the scratching of the quill mixed with the slight clicking sounds of potion ingredients being processed, creating an exceptionally harmonious atmosphere. When I lowered my eyelids, I vaguely sensed he had glanced at me. I looked up suspiciously and saw him concentrating on homework, his expression very focused and serious. Was I mistaken? I frowned slightly, thought about it in confusion, then lowered my eyelids again, focusing on the ingredients deftly. Over at the desk, Snape, feeling guilty like a thief for being caught staring, breathed a sigh of relief without showing it. I sensed the quill stop moving again. I looked up and found that he was indeed staring into space, appearing somewhat dazed. This look was uncommon for him. I frowned with worry and persuaded him again. If you're tired, go sleep. Don't push yourself. I'll finish these as soon as possible and go back. Seeing him still silent, I suddenly realized my mistake. Sorry, I forgot. Professor Snape, I'll go back now. I'll hurry to finish processing these tomorrow. Wait, Potter. He quickly stopped me. You can continue to stay here while I rest. He stiffened his face unnaturally and added dryly, there is no need to rush with the ingredients either. Oh, I was a bit stunned by the unusual permission. He tightly gripped the wand inside his robes, made up his mind, and then stood up with a gloomy face, striding towards the bedroom inside the office. The door closed with a firm click. I sat in the silence. I knew exactly what was happening behind that thin wooden barrier. His composed appearance would have instantly crumbled. He would have drawn his wand and urgently chanted in a low voice in the darkness, Expecto Patronum. I knew he was watching. He knew that under normal circumstances, a vigorous silver doe would leap from his wand tip next. That was his Patronus, the memory of Lily. But the knowledge of my fate, the Horcrux, had tainted that memory. It had changed the emotional landscape of his soul. He knew that Patronus was connected to me now. I imagined the moment, a large mass of silver-white mist erupting from the wand tip. No doe, nor any other image. Has it changed after all? I imagined him murmuring. Not Lily, and not Potter, then what is it? I knew he would be bewilderedly gazing at the silver-white mist that refused to take shape. After a long minute, the door opened. He walked out. The bright light of the office instantly illuminated his eyes, and the sight of me appeared before him. I noted the subtle change. He looked relieved. At least his Patronus hadn't directly turned into a stag or something similar, I deduced. That was good enough, wasn't it? Snape's mood suddenly improved again. He saw me, alive and processing his ingredients. He had his certainty back. On Monday afternoon, after Sirius returned to St. Mungo's, he was still very concerned about the follow-up. Early the next morning, he sent an owl letter specifically to me asking how the result was. I decisively turned black into white, replying, Professor Snape not only refused, but he also scolded me severely. When Sirius replied, he didn't know whether to encourage or comfort me. Worried to the point of losing his hair, he awkwardly changed the subject, asking me why I had suddenly said I didn't like Snape at that time. I managed to muddle through. Now was not the time to explain to Black. The Ministry of Magic's final verdict on the Sirius Black case also came down this week. Peter Pettigrew was officially escorted to Azkaban on Thursday morning. This was exactly what Dumbledore and I were waiting for. Peter was meant to escape, but Snape didn't think so. I have no doubt those Aurors are all idiots. Not long after, Snape, who heard the news after the second class in the morning, stormed into the headmaster's office like a hurricane. He sneered with a dark face. I'm afraid even Longbottom could do better than them. It amazes me. How did they reach a new low in order stupidity? If one day I could turn their brains into a stupidity potion, I have no doubt I would be this year's recipient of the Order of Merlin First Class. Tsa, the committee would exclaim at the purity of those potions. Dumbledore and I looked at each other and could only smile bitterly. Ever since learning the news of Peter Pettigrew's escape, Snape's face had been consistently ugly. I could understand. Even if he knew the truth, having just learned the real culprit not long ago, and then watching Peter escape with intense hatred, he must be furious. I could only try to comfort himself tactfully. Professor Snape, actually— What did you call me? Snape suddenly interrupted me, narrowing his eyes, his voice becoming dangerously silky. Professor Snape? Huh? I was a bit confused, but keenly sensed that Snape was not to be trifled with right now. I looked at Dumbledore beside me, who smiled at me very lovingly. Mr. Potter, do you need me to help you recall the correct form of address? Snape glared at me gloomily, approaching step by step. His cold aura was the brief calm before a storm. It seemed he was taking out his bad mood from earlier on this. My body stiffened immediately. Without time to think, I hurriedly called out ingratiatingly, Severus! The portraits couldn't help but let out a burst of deliberately suppressed gasps. Severus, I didn't expect your relationship to be this good, Dumbledore chuckled. Hearing this, Snape's expression strangely turned into one of anger from embarrassment. He pressed his lips together tightly, his cold gaze sweeping over Dumbledore and the portraits. Unable to save face, he grabbed me by the collar and hissed recklessly, "Potter, who allowed you to call a professor by his given name?" I opened my eyes wide in disbelief. Not allowed to call him Professor Snape, and not allowed to call him Severus? Then what could I call him? I glared at Snape, broke free from the hand grasping my collar, and mocked coldly. Yes, the great potions master, Mr. Severus Snape, your humble student really doesn't know how to address you anymore. Could you please be merciful enough to teach me? Looking at little Potter's aggrieved and angry appearance, Snape couldn't help but slowly rein in his embarrassment and anger. He moved his lips, attempting to apologize dryly, but I stopped him with a fierce glare. The black-haired boy shot a glare almost identical to Snape at both Snape and Dumbledore, then spun around abruptly and stormed out, flicking his school robes angrily. The door to the headmaster's office slammed against the wall with a loud bang. "Severus, Harry looks more and more like you, doesn't he?" Dumbledore chuckled. Snape's face turned even blacker. He glared at his right hand with self-loathing and had no choice but to flick his sleeve and leave as well. Ugh. Despite the bad moods of both founders, the dueling club this afternoon had to proceed on schedule. In the Great Hall, a high platform was erected in the center. Lockhart looked very spirited today, his face flushed with excitement. He stood pompously on one side of the high platform holding his wand, waving to the students below. On the other side, Professor Snape in black robes also had a dark face today, his aura extremely gloomy and terrifying. For the dueling club today, Professor Snape has invited me as his partner. I must say, this move is brilliant, given that the students all know about my glorious deeds. I let out a cold sneer. This sound instantly attracted the gazes of people around me. "Harry, what do you mean?" Hermione asked in an annoyed whisper. "It seems you disagree a little," Lockhart asked, not having heard the meaning. "Let's begin." Snape, standing on the other side, grew impatient and interrupted Lockhart's attempt to continue bragging. He was prepared to transfer all his anger from the morning onto Lockhart. 3. A smile appeared on Lockhart's face, but before he could raise and wave his wand, Snape had already pointed his wand at him and said coldly, "Expelliarmus." After using this spell, Snape immediately followed up with a silent impediment jinx. This caused Lockhart not only to lose his wand, but also to be suddenly knocked backward, falling wretchedly to the ground and rolling several times. I did that on purpose." Lockhart sat up, his head still a bit muddled, but he immediately flashed his trademark smile, boasting, "If I had acted, I guarantee I could have beaten him to the ground without blowing away the dust." Snape watched Lockhart unexpressively, slowly raising an eyebrow. "Professor Lockhart," Snape spoke in a smooth voice, "I feel the demonstration just now wasn't comprehensive. At least we should show them the basic spells. And the students are all looking forward to seeing you show off your skills, don't you think?" A faint arc curled at Snape's lips as he complimented. Hearing this, Lockhart took the bait immediately. "No rush," Snape suddenly drawled, speaking slowly. "The students must also want to come up and try, so I'll pick a pair of partners to try as well." He suddenly called out a name, "Potter." "Your partner is Malfoy from Slytherin," Snape said coldly, looking at me from the stage. I looked at young Malfoy unexpressively, then went up to the platform unwillingly. I wasn't going to embarrass myself in public. "Ready? Then let the second round begin. Listen to my count. 1, 2, 3. Lockhart raised his wand again. Now Snape and I were on the same side of the platform, while Lockhart and Malfoy were on the other. 1. I slowly drew my wand. 2. Standing very close to me, Snape suddenly squeezed a word out through his teeth, low and barely audible. "Sorry." He was apologizing for the insults. I accepted it. 3. I barely managed to glare at him, and the tip of my wand suddenly shifted from pointing at Malfoy to pointing at Lockhart. "Avis." The spell was instant. A flock of angry birds shot out, aimed directly at Lockhart's face. Teaching someone a lesson? Clearly, I had premeditated this.
2 red lights flashed in succession, and Lockhart fell to the ground with a cry. He had just wretchedly rolled backward a few times when a flock of small birds suddenly swooped down, chasing and pecking at his face. Ow, pain! Wait, not the face. Peck somewhere else. Ow! Lockhart immediately covered his head and let out a series of frantic screams. On the other side of the platform, both Snape and I held our wands up. We looked at each other almost simultaneously. "I won't accept it," I said expressionlessly. Without even looking at the miserable victim, I backhandedly cast a Jellylegs jinx. Lockhart, who had just stood up clutching his face, cried out in pain and fell again. It was me, being a bit impulsive. Albus at that time. Snape hissed an apology in a voice so light it was almost inaudible. From my angle, I couldn't even see his lips move, nor did he maintain prolonged eye contact. Instead, he stared calmly at Lockhart opposite us, feigning focus. "So, I apologize for my inappropriate remarks. Potter, you certainly have the right to address me that way." Feeling that the more he explained, the more it sounded like making excuses, he gave up on being tactful and spoke dryly, awkwardly, and without confidence. The velvety, soft, and low voice vanished into the air quickly. "So you can just take your anger out on me?" I laughed out of extreme anger. Although my volume dropped to a very low level, my eyes were cold and mocking. "Shut up!" I turned my head abruptly in annoyance and angrily cast a Stupefy. Thus, Lockhart on the other side of the platform fell silent. I turned back, my voice still extremely low, but mocking in Snape's own tone. How can humble me address a professor by his given name? You know, a given name can only be used by close or trusted people. Professor Snape, as the most insignificant of your numerous students throughout the wizarding world who doesn't please you and always disgusts you. "Potter, when did I let you?" I tilted my head, revealing a helpless and poignant expression, forcefully interrupting him. "I really don't dare." "It's too terrifying. Just thinking about it makes me unable to hold my wand, Professor Snape." I sighed with a sneer. "Please don't say that again in the future. I'm afraid I'll develop a habit of trembling hands. That's a big problem." Snape stood frozen on the spot, gripping his wand, rendered speechless by my sarcastic remarks. Seeing Snape silent with a dark face, I turned my gaze back to the opposite side. Lockhart lay wretchedly face down on the platform, unconscious. Malfoy stood beside him, unharmed. "Sorry, I missed," I said calmly. I gave Snape a final cold glare, put away my wand, and walked off the stage on my own, apologizing insincerely. "I'm very sorry, Professor Lockhart. My wand might have malfunctioned. I was clearly aiming at Malfoy. How did I miss every time? Please don't mind." Malfoy, still clutching his wand and acting like a mascot the whole time, looked at Lockhart's miserable state, then trembled almost imperceptibly, his face pale with fear. Snape scanned the circle of students below with a heavy face. The students also stared back at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Then that concludes today's session," Snape said symbolically, then hurriedly turned and went down to chase after me. In the empty entrance hall on the first floor, the long-legged Snape finally caught up with me. "Professor Snape, is there anything else?" I glared hatefully at my own legs, then forced myself to look up and give him a polite, fake smile. Snape stood stiff-faced and speechless for a moment. He could handle anything, but facing sarcastic remarks he was familiar with, he didn't know what to say. He was experiencing the feelings of others who were usually spoken to like that by him. "Potter, don't forget tomorrow afternoon's detention," Snape finally said dryly. "Of course I won't forget. After all, these are Professor Snape's orders. How would I dare not follow them?" I gave him a smooth, mocking answer. So, was Potter usually pretending? He gazed silently at me, suddenly thinking of more things.
Potter had always shown traces of resemblance to him in subtle ways before. Handwriting, posture, aura, only he had never paid attention. For a time, Snape thought with an unstable mind, only able to stare blankly as the black-haired boy stormed away with large strides. He probably needed some time to digest this fact. Potter wasn't just attracted to him, he was terrifyingly compatible. After leaving Snape's line of sight, I suddenly covered my eyes with a headache, standing in the corridor feeling conflicted. I had vented my anger just now, but thinking back, revealing my original personality wasn't my intention. I broke over such a trivial matter. Besides, isn't it normal for Snape to detest a Potter? I murmured, unable to figure out the reason for my outburst. It was just another deliberate fault-finding to embarrass me. Why should I be angry? Thinking this way, I calmed down, prepared to explain to myself tomorrow afternoon. I would simply come up with an excuse to gloss over today's events and deny the resemblance. I vaguely felt that was not something I should dwell on.
The next afternoon, apart from the series of events triggered by the news that Professor Lockhart was still receiving treatment in the hospital wing, Hogwarts was peaceful. I had originally prepared a belly full of excuses, thinking that if he asked, I would say something like, "That was because I felt this method of revenge would make you the angriest, which is why I did it." But when I went for detention, Snape merely gave me a deep look and asked nothing. "Today, you are to process these 2 buckets of toads. You may leave when you are finished." I agreed with some confusion, habitually taking out my gloves and stool and sitting down to begin. But Snape was actually still standing in front of me, not leaving, looking down from above, his expression somewhat hesitant. "What is it, Professor Snape?" I asked. I made up my mind that no matter what he said this time, I wouldn't talk back. I had been too abnormal yesterday. "Potter, your detention ends today." The black-robed man announced this expressionlessly, attempting to lace the second half of his sentence with sarcasm. "I hope I will not need to assign you detention again in the future, Harry Potter." Detention actually ended? Without Dumbledore's requirement, shouldn't he seize the opportunity to give Potter detention for the entire school year? I was stunned, not quite reacting. Okay, I understand. My reaction fell unobtrusively into Snape's eyes, verifying those persistent guesses once again. So Snape still didn't leave. He turned his face away and continued unnaturally. "Potter, my office needs an assistant to process potion ingredients. The pay is 2 sickles a week. Do you want to try?" I was stunned, my eyes showing some disbelief. Snape crossed his arms, trying to look imposing, and said indifferently, "Those potion ingredients of yours that exceed regulations must be brewed under my supervision. If you stay, you can brew your own potions after the work is done." This hit exactly what I wanted. I agreed. "I'm willing, Professor Snape." Only then did Snape seem to breathe a sigh of relief as his face darkened and he returned behind his desk. It had been a while since school started, and the weather was getting colder bit by bit. The normal temperature in the dungeons was exceptionally low. Snape never used to think of such small issues, but now, as soon as he sat down, he waved his wand very naturally, causing the fire in the fireplace to blaze. Warm air swept away the chill in the room. Only when he saw little Potter on the stool unconsciously relax his hunched shoulders did he soften his expression without overthinking, lowering his head to grade homework. In the following period, I naturally couldn't fail to notice the subtle changes in Severus Snape's attitude toward Harry Potter. But I really couldn't understand what he thought of me now. Although he still kept a cold, straight face, spoke with sarcasm, and deducted points mercilessly when necessary, in the subtle details, I always felt that he was caring for me at every turn. For example, he would sternly scold me for forgetting the time to return to the dormitory while brewing potions, then transform a chair into a quilt in the office, gloatingly making me make do with a floor bed on the cold ground, only to stoke the fireplace fire high before returning to his bedroom, silently casting several warming charms behind my back. If his attitude towards me was too good, I would definitely push back. If his attitude was terrible, I would definitely stay put. But what was with this baffling behavior recently? Was it just out of his excessive desire to protect me? Merlin, why was his protective behavior different from the way he protected Potter in the previous life?
While I was suffering from headaches and internal conflict, one night I suddenly had a dream. It was a strange dream. Appearing in the dream was a dark and narrow room. I could only see a bit of the blazing fire in the fireplace through the crack in the door and the large armchair in front of the fireplace. "Move me closer to the fire, Peter," a cold and familiar voice rang out. "Where has Nagini gone?" Another person approached the chair, trembling with fear, answering nervously and shaking while moving it. "Master, I don't know. It probably went out." The face illuminated by the firelight was one I had seen not long ago. It was Peter Pettigrew. There was no doubt. Since Voldemort, Peter, and Nagini were mentioned simultaneously, it meant the plan Dumbledore and I had plotted was officially underway. Peter Pettigrew had indeed found Voldemort in the forests of Albania and brought him back, dedicated to his resurrection. When I realized this wasn't an ordinary dream, I reflexively employed a clemency, cutting off the image immediately. In the next moment, I woke up. The pitch-black Gryffindor dormitory was quiet. I stared at the bed curtains, breathing rapidly, my eyes hollow. In this instant, I figured out many things. "This is the reason Albus insisted I teach Potter a clemency back then," I murmured. "Voldemort can invade Potter's mind so easily, I'm afraid even he himself hasn't realized this yet." Precisely because of this, Albus had insisted back then not to let Potter spy on Voldemort's actions through this method, as it was very deceptive. Instead, he had me resume my role as a spy to obtain real information at great risk. I understood why Potter back then couldn't quite resist this temptation. Even I wanted to watch a little longer just now to find out what Voldemort intended to do next, rather than letting Albus know and send myself on a dangerous mission again. Actually, this method is still feasible, because this time it's me who is proficient in a clemency. Things are different. My brain whirred rapidly. Come to think of it, I should be able to invade back. I paused, calculating the possibility of this idea. Was there anyone in the world better at a clemency than Severus Snape? The answer was, of course not. Conveniently, the day after I had the dream was a Saturday. I deliberately got up early, avoided the staircases students frequented, and took 2 secret passages I knew to reach the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. The reason for such painstaking effort was that I knew Snape's routine well. Unless there was an emergency, he wouldn't come to see Albus this early. Avoiding students' notice was to prevent any Slytherin from seeing me and running to tell him to curry favor. I planned to explain last night's strategic discovery to Albus. After we discussed it carefully, I could pretend to have just woken up late and rush to the dungeons around 9. I had to say, I thought even if I was late now, he would only mock me sarcastically and never mention deducting points. I used my own cynical logic to explain his behavior. If Potter was completely isolated by Gryffindor due to excessive point deductions, leading to low work efficiency, unfinished material processing, and employment completely disproportionate to remuneration, then he would definitely start considering Potter's feelings too. I suddenly realized I had found the truth behind his recent kindness, and I stopped dwelling on it. Standing in front of the stone gargoyle, I calmly recited the names of all the new sweets from Honeydukes. When I said pineapple jelly, the 2 gargoyles jumped aside. "Professor Dumbledore, it's Harry Potter," I knocked on the door and said. I waited quietly for a dozen seconds before there was a reaction, accompanied by the crisp cry of a phoenix. "Harry, coming so early, is something the matter?" Dumbledore opened the door wearing purple sleeping robes, a white nightcap adorned with many small stars sitting crookedly on his head. "Indeed, Professor Dumbledore, there's something I need to tell you." I paused here, organizing my words. Dumbledore turned and waved his wand, conjuring 2 Gryffindor red chairs. After I sat down, he snapped his fingers. A sumptuous, steaming breakfast appeared above my knees. I reacted quickly, steadying the tray so the pumpkin juice wouldn't spill. I glared at Dumbledore unhappily, a clear attempt to distract me with a contest of patience. "No rush. You must have an Eden coming so early, right? Harry, we can't talk on an empty stomach. Eat first." I decided to go along with Dumbledore's wishes and look down at the tray. The variety was so rich it shamed me. I scanned it. The only familiar items were what I usually ate: thick sturgeon sandwiches, sizzling sausages and bacon, greasy fried eggs, mashed potatoes, and mushroom cream soup. I ate slowly without feeling embarrassed. I ate with peace of mind. It was just a contest of patience. I could wait. Not until I felt a bit stuffed did I finally concede defeat, placing the tray properly and looking up helplessly at Dumbledore, who still wore that patient smile. Finished? Can you tell me what it is now? Yes, I began to explain reluctantly. Last night, after falling asleep, I accidentally connected to Voldemort's mind and saw him in a small room with Peter Pettigrew. Dumbledore's relaxed expression became grave. To be precise, Voldemort invaded my mind without even knowing it. He seems to be able to do this very easily. And then I saw those things. As soon as I realized, I used a clumsy to cut off the image. So Tom doesn't know he has this ability yet. Could it be because of the Horcrux fragment in your forehead, creating some connection between you? Dumbledore frowned slightly. How is your eclumpsy? Professor Snape taught me in the future, I said, strictly adhering to the content revealed under Veritaserum back then. I think my level has reached the same master level as his, no exaggeration. Harry, remember, if this happens again in the future, cut off the image immediately. You can't give him a chance to contact you. But, Harry, rest assured, Dumbledore raised his voice slightly over mine. We have other channels to obtain information about Tom. We don't need you to take risks. If you don't let me take risks, will you let Professor Snape take risks? My anger flared up explicably. Let him become a double agent again, lurking servilely beside Voldemort, abandoning his reputation and future, risking his life just to obtain that bit of illusory real information? Dumbledore was stunned for a moment, staring at me, somewhat speechless. There is no only, I interrupted him, leaning forward and speaking somewhat forcefully. Professor Dumbledore, my eclumpsy is very good. I can completely invade Voldemort's mind in reverse to check the situation, and I am confident I won't be deceived by false images he deliberately displays. There is no need for Professor Snape to take risks at all. Harry, you must understand, such a life won't be for a day or two, but for years, even many years. Every day will be spent in a state of complete mental tension. This is too hard and too difficult for you. One moment of relaxation and you are finished. That's still easier than Professor Snape risking his life as a double agent, I insisted, clenching my hands into fists. Precisely because I had experienced how painful and numb that life was, I didn't want myself to experience it again no matter what. He lived too tiredly in the last few years of his life. I just need to use my brain, Professor Dumbledore, I insisted. I stared fixedly at Dumbledore, and he stared solemnly back at me from behind his half-moon spectacles. Neither spoke for a long time. All right, Dumbledore's voice softened a bit, finally compromising. I have only one final requirement. What? I breathed a sigh of relief, but dared not let my guard down. Let Severus decide. Dumbledore raised his eyelids, clasping his fingers together. I understand your feeling of not wanting Severus to know these plans, so I will only call him here and say nothing. Harry, what you need to do is prove that your eclumpsy is stronger than Severus's, Dumbledore said with a grave face. If you can't do this, then your assumptions and guarantees just now are meaningless. I will proceed with the original plan. Is that so? Do we need to compete in eclumpsy? I murmured, lifting my head, my eyes becoming sharp. I must win. Dumbledore's blue eyes looked towards the phoenix, sleeping soundly on the perch, his gaze somewhat distant, saying nothing. Although I was determined, I knew I couldn't fulfill the guarantee. He would still refuse. But I had to try.
After making the decision, Dumbledore immediately sent a message to my former self via Fox, hurriedly summoning the potions professor who had just woken up. Severus, Harry says his occlumency was taught by you, so I want to verify it, Dumbledore told him with a beaming smile. I knew he understood immediately. The moment Snape saw little Potter in the headmaster's office unusually early in the morning and Albus suddenly mentioned occlumency, he knew I was hiding something. That's correct, Snape replied, shooting a cold glare at me. Then there is no problem, Dumbledore mused. Severus, could you test Harry's occlumency? Harry says his level is no weaker than yours. Hearing this, Snape's eyes immediately swept over suspiciously. He was deliberately being provoked.
I lowered my eyelids, staring straight at the tips of Dumbledore's shoes, avoiding the knife-like gaze from myself. A test? Potter, I didn't expect your skills to be so superb, Snape said, the corner of his mouth lifting into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the next instant, his face turned icy, and without any warning, he cast Legilimency on me. I had no time to react, but my brain, as it had done hundreds of times before, subconsciously employed occlumency. My eyes turned vacant. Snape frowned, his obsidian-like eyes fixed on me, concentrating his mind. My expression remained unchanged, but inwardly alert, I raised my defenses to the maximum. Even facing Voldemort's Legilimency in the past didn't feel as difficult as facing myself now. Is that why they say the hardest enemy to surpass is oneself? We froze in place, locked in a struggle. The silence in the office was anxious. Snape's lips were tightly pursed. I gritted my teeth. Beads of sweat slowly seeped onto my forehead. I knew Dumbledore was about to stop the contest, but I couldn't let it end in a draw. I had to win. With a burst of effort, I struggled to switch from defense to offense and broke through his own mental defenses. Crack! I suddenly realized things had gone bad. I had gone too far. Even if I needed to win the occlumency contest, I knew without thinking that Snape would never want anyone to see his memories. My feet landed on solid ground. We were under a tree by the Black Lake at Hogwarts. Under the tree, a group of senior students were gathered, jeering, with whistles, laughter, and applause ringing out. My face instantly became even uglier. That familiar figure hung upside down in the air, struggling futilely, looking both humiliated and desperate. Closest to him were 4 people, all pointing their wands at him. The memory I could never forget in my life. Wearing a detestable grin, the Elder Potter turned to look at the people beside him and asked loudly, "Who wants to see me take off Snivelus's pants?" And that red-haired, green-eyed Pearl was also standing in the crowd at this moment, the corners of her mouth seemingly twitching upward as if wanting to smile. Enough! Snape suddenly grabbed my shoulder, his grip as strong as an iron clamp, hurting me severely. We abruptly returned to the quiet headmaster's office, panting with intense emotion. Severus? Dumbledore looked over with concern, already guessing the violation. Snape's voice was terribly low, glaring fixedly at me, his eyes completely hollow. "I'm very sorry, Professor Snape, but I won," I braced myself and said. I knew saying this would only make himself even more furious, but I had to settle the matter now. "Yes, you won." Snape's voice was cold as ice. He didn't even show a sneering expression. His face was terribly blank. He stared fixedly at me, as if trying desperately to suppress the terrible storm churning in his eyes. "About today, you are absolutely not to say a single word," Snape finally threatened word by word. "I know," I agreed, dryly with my head down. Snape gave Dumbledore a final glance, then abruptly flicked his robes, turned, and stormed out of the headmaster's office. I stood there, feeling the residual tension of the forbidden memory. He walked quickly down the corridor, clutching his wand tightly, barely able to suppress the rage and humiliation in his heart. But the story wasn't over yet. Just as he was reaching the end of the corridor, a familiar red light suddenly flashed past the wall. Snape stopped abruptly, his face dark as water, watching a note appear out of thin air and slowly drift to the ground. I knew what it was. Dumbledore's loopy handwriting. "Severus, come to the headmaster's office again at noon today. There is a memory I think you must see."
I was absent from my paid work that morning. I was busy, but I also felt slightly vindicated knowing my former self would be annoyed by my absence. However, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable. Snape returned to the headmaster's office at noon, as agreed. "Severus, you're here." Dumbledore was waiting. A pensive was already placed on the long desk. "What do you want me to see?" Snape asked coldly. "I didn't have time to tell you about the last plan and this one. Now we have time," Dumbledore replied, his gaze somewhat elusive. Snape was suspicious. "Is that all?"
Of course, there are some other things in the memory, Dumbledore admitted. Severus, I hope you decide whether to be angry with Harry after viewing the memory. I could imagine Snape scoffing immediately. Otherwise, Harry will surely be heartbroken in the end, Dumbledore added. He's laying it on thick, I thought. He's trying to manipulate Severus's guilt. Snape buried his face in the pensive. I knew the memories being shown. Snape was watching the scene in the headmaster's office from 2 days ago. I was arguing fiercely with Dumbledore. If you don't let me take risks, will you let Professor Snape take risks? I watched myself ask Dumbledore. My voice was loud, defending my former self. Let him become a double agent again, lurking servilely beside Voldemort, abandoning his reputation and future, risking his life just to obtain that bit of illusory real information? My occlumency is very good. I can completely invade Voldemort's mind in reverse to check the situation. That's still easier than Professor Snape risking his life as a double agent. Snape, watching, would have felt his knuckles turn white. He saw the conclusion of the occlumency contest. I'm very sorry, Professor Snape, but I won, little Potter said, bracing himself. The cramped yet determined look from the morning appeared before Snape's eyes again. That is the reason Harry had to win, Dumbledore's memory self said slowly. The memory surged, returning him to reality. Snape stared expressionlessly at the pensive, rendered speechless. Potter actually defended him like that? Potter was bearing that secret alone, enduring fear and suffering for the remainder of his life, while having to feign indifference towards him. You can't demand that he consider too much while winning. He is still a child, Dumbledore advised tactfully. As for Harry's intentions, I think we don't need to prove them further. Snape pursed his lips tightly, remaining silent. Waves of annoyance rose in his heart, but also some feelings he didn't want to admit. He was being protected by Cotter, by any means possible. There is no need to do that, Snape finally spoke, his voice cold and hard. After the Dark Lord resurrects, I will return to his service. I will, Snape paused, his voice even drier, protect Lily's child well. Dumbledore frowned in disapproval. Severus, do you know what you are saying? Snape looked away, avoiding eye contact. Dumbledore asked abruptly, forgive my presumption, Severus. Do you like Harry? Snape was so shocked by this question he almost choked on his own saliva. His face flushed red in an instant. Dumbledore, are you going senile? He hissed ferociously. Aren't you denying it right now because Harry saw your memory? Dumbledore asked back. Yes, Potter saw his most shameful past. Snape sneered in disgust. How could I possibly like a Potter? And he's the elder Potter's son. This reason was indeed very sufficient. Dumbledore seemed to believe it, nodding slowly, his expression suddenly becoming weary. Then, Severus, I have only one request. Snape looked at Dumbledore expectantly. Don't lose your temper with Harry anymore because of your memory, Dumbledore said with feigned sorrow. Snape's expression froze instantly. What do you mean? He asked with a dark face, barely concealing the anxiety in his tone. Dumbledore blinked and sighed, half-truthfully. Harry said he was only 18 when he died in his previous life. He hadn't even graduated from Hogwarts. This time, with the information Harry provided, the search for Horcruxes will only be faster. Maybe it will only take 5 years, or perhaps 3. The meaning of Dumbledore's unfinished sentence was obvious. Snape's expression was so gloomy it could drip water. He clenched his fists and said nothing. Severus, promise me, Dumbledore urged him. Be nicer to Harry, okay? If he expresses that he likes you, please don't reject him outright either. This sentence made Snape's heart constrict tightly. He could only manage a grunt from his nose, considering it an agreement. Although this realization was very, very, very unbelievable. But Snape indeed couldn't deny the fact he had only realized today. He just didn't want to admit it in front of Albus. He had retreated. The protection was now absolutely certain.
Saturday afternoon. I had originally planned to go to the library to borrow some books and spend the afternoon researching potions.
Who knew that just as I left the Gryffindor common room, I would run into a senior Slytherin student coming to call me to the dungeons? Professor Snape? I asked in disbelief. Wants me to go to the dungeons to continue processing ingredients? Yes, Potter, the senior relayed the message. The noble Mr. Potter, did you leave your brain on your bed? So much so that you're late by a whole morning and still can't remember your tasks in the dungeons. I showed no expression on my face, but felt a bit uneasy inside. This was wrong. He had only just been humiliated this morning, acting as if nothing had happened and summoning me back to work so soon? Was this really okay? I walked expressionlessly toward my former office, sure that he had called me over to settle accounts. However, after pushing open that familiar black door, I realized something was even more wrong. Snape wasn't sitting behind his desk, but on a chair in front of the fireplace, waiting for me. His hands were clenched on his knees, and I could see the tense silhouette of his body. He was staring expressionlessly at the dancing flames. Good, I finally relaxed inwardly. He had only just reacted now and called me over to settle accounts, hadn't he? Professor Snape, I'm here. I lowered my head, prepared to face the storm. Harry, Snape said softly in a low voice. I jerked my head up in horror, staring wide-eyed at himself. Potter, Snape continued at that leisurely pace, saying my full name with a half-smile. What a noble person. Even a professor can't summon you anymore? So that was it. My body suddenly relaxed, though for a moment I was scared into a cold sweat. He didn't call me Harry. It was a hallucination. I internally dismissed the sliver of affection. Now I give you two choices, Potter. Snape still looked dangerously like he could explode at any moment. He narrowed his eyes and spoke coldly. He had thought about it all noon and finally made this decision. He still couldn't accept the fact that I had seen his most shameful memory. I use Obliviate on you. Snape looked extremely cold, the corner of his mouth slowly curling into a mocking smile. Or do you prefer to do it yourself? My heart tightened and I understood immediately. He wanted the shame erased. I was about to nod in agreement when I suddenly realized this was an opportunity to grant Snape the revenge he had longed for. I could give him a memory of victory. I lowered my head and whispered, Professor Snape, actually, in the future, I also know about this matter. Snape jolted, his expression becoming somewhat complex. Did we stay together even after that? I started to fabricate lies dryly. And the way to untie your knot is simple. Just retaliate for the insult. Of course, Professor Snape, you know what I'm referring to. A surge of pure rage suddenly rose in Snape's heart. He clenched his fists in disbelief, glaring at me. His future self actually treated Harry Potter like that? How dared he? Potter wasn't that bastard Elder Potter. What right did his future self have to treat Potter that way? Oblivious, I continued bracing myself. So my attitude now is the same as in the future. Potter, don't even think about it. Snape ground out the words through his teeth, interrupting me furiously. I was somewhat taken aback. I was just trying to help. Professor Snape, then at least look at this memory. Anyway, it's something that has already happened. You can treat it as if you've already taken revenge. Since we look exactly the same, you can also vent your anger. Enough! Snape roared in rage, grabbing me by the collar, unable to bear it any longer. His eyes were terrifying, glaring at me through gritted teeth, his nose almost bumping into my face as he whispered extremely low, Harry Potter, shut your mouth. I obeyed, somewhat aggrievedly. Snape looked at my reaction with an ashen face, shaking with suppressed fury. He was so angry his liver hurt, not because I saw the memory, but because I suggested he was vile enough to hurt me just to settle his score with James. He was furious at the purity of my self-sacrifice. Snape took a deep breath, barely managing to suppress his emotions. His cheeks were almost twitching with rage. He ground out through his teeth. How could I possibly treat you like the Elder Potter and take revenge on you? Does he have the brain of a pig? I finished internally. Indeed, Professor Snape wouldn't. I also felt that while he might think it, he wouldn't actually do such a thing. Fortunately, I had already thought of a countermeasure. But there is a specially modified shrinking solution. I looked up at Snape and said in a deep voice, Professor Snape, what if you return to that age without your memories? The same lakeside, the same person, I just need to change my eye color. I can think of at least 3 ways to do that. If everything goes according to plan. Snape's breath hitched. He stared at little Potter in disbelief, rendered speechless. If it were truly the teenage him, seeing the Elder Potter alone by the lake. Snape's face grew even darker. What he would do, the answer was screaming in his mind. He didn't even need to think about it. Hang the Elder Potter upside down, humiliate him just as he had been treated back then, mocking and ridiculing him with everything he had. This was a scene he had fantasized about countless times since that day. Snape closed his eyes, unwilling to think further. And little Potter, no matter how excellent at combat, would not resist. Potter, you... Snape's voice was dry, almost unable to speak. The thought of little Potter being hung in the air, suffering that kind of humiliation, being tormented by him to the fullest, his face showing an expression of mortification and despair, struggling angrily but helplessly, bearing the pain that shouldn't be inflicted upon him. Snape couldn't control the clenching of his fists. His fingernails were digging deeply and painfully into his palms. Most importantly, little Potter was doing this voluntarily. What kind of mindset did he have to completely disregard his own feelings just to let Professor Snape resolve a damned knot in his heart? It turned out he liked him to this extent. Snape really thought every time that the depth of Potter's affection for him was already profound, but he never expected that every time it would refresh his understanding. Snape stood before me, the hair framing his face, obscuring his expression, leaving only a shadow. He stood wordlessly, fists clenched tight at his sides, even trembling slightly. I wasn't quite sure how to gauge his reaction, stealing frequent, suspicious glances at his face, but seeing nothing. Professor Snape, I had no choice but to probe cautiously. Do you still want to see the memory? That incredibly familiar black robe suddenly obscured my vision, and a warm chest abruptly closed the distance, bumping into my face. Snape that suddenly pulled me tightly into his arms, pressing the back of my head and embracing me tremblingly. Now, my voice grew fainter until it died away. My eyes widened in terror. I began to struggle desperately, trying to escape my own embrace. It's over, it's over, it's over, it's over! Snape has gone mad!
I struggled desperately in terror for a while, but my strength was still no match for himself. I couldn't break free no matter what. I could only stay stiffly in his arms, stammering an explanation. Professor Snape, I was just helping you as a friend. Actually, our relationship isn't really that good right now. You don't need to do this. He released me unnaturally, looked away, and said dryly, "No need to hide anymore, Potter." Did you think those little secrets between you and Albus could be kept from me? Horcrux? A clemency? He asked sarcastically. He found out? My eyes were panicked for a moment, but I immediately stabilized my emotions, staring intently into his eyes, observing his reaction with some unease. Snape noticed this. His heart warmed further, but his expression became even more unnatural. Potter. He turned his head away with a cold face. I have searched all books related to souls. Although there are no clues yet, I will find a way. What way? I asked casually, startled by my own answer, but the anxiety in my heart eased slightly. This version of Snape didn't seem as disheartened as he had been. Snape glanced coldly at me, sneering impatiently. Hopefully, what I save in the end is your brain, not a head filled with stupidity. Potter. Otherwise,
Did you think I was expending all this effort just to help you find a more comfortable way to die?
I didn't reply. My heart tightened again. I knew he couldn't find a way. In his previous life, even Dumbledore had no other way. He didn't explain further. Whether I believed him or not wasn't important. What was important was that he had to find that way. Snape turned his body even further away, now almost with his back to me. Potter, you... The rest of his words suddenly faded, becoming inaudible. What? Professor Snape? I also reined in my mood, somewhat puzzled. Snape still didn't speak. Then his voice returned to normal, asking suddenly and calmly, Potter, how did we get along in the future? How did we get along? I was caught off guard, my expression becoming awkward. Just brewing potions together and researching potions. So I don't mind reverting to that state. During the summer holidays, Albus said you only need to stay at your aunt's house for 2 weeks. Snape suddenly spoke faster, hissing words that were almost indistinct. I was tempted for a moment. 2 of me researching potions together, the efficiency would double. But I immediately realized this was Snape speaking to Harry Potter. My own attitude had become too outrageous. He hugged Harry Potter? He wanted to research potions harmoniously with Harry Potter? The realization made my scalp tingle with nausea. No, I hurriedly refused decisively. What did you say, Potter? Snape whipped around to glare at me, his expression extremely unfriendly. Professor Snape, I am a Potter. I looked deeply and sincerely into his eyes, trying to explain this fact clearly. I know how much you hate my dad. I gritted my teeth, and I look exactly like him. You are different, Snape said coldly with a dark face. I hadn't expected myself to say that. I paused for a moment before arguing, but I am also reckless, arrogant, impulsive, and conceited, just like him. And a Gryffindor to boot. Detestable. Those are your own words, I added, giving Snape no chance to defend. Snape's face turned black instantly, gritting his teeth slightly. He looked pained, as if Dumbledore was listening. But your mother was also a Gryffindor. Listen, I only loathe, dislike your old man. You are different from him. Your potions, your character, are more like your mother. I looked at my former self with a strange expression. Could this be the reason? He actually treated little Potter, who looked exactly like the elder Potter, as an existence more like Lily? That was why his attitude toward me was becoming increasingly weird. All right, I agree. I changed my tune. Professor Snape, actually, I look forward to researching potions with you. In the sentiment of missing Lily, I felt the same as he did, so I was very willing to help him. Snape's expression softened. He looked deeply at the boy in front of him, crossed his arms to regain his imposing manner, and asked unnaturally, Is that what you call me in the future too? Severus, I corrected myself smoothly. This new positioning was bearable. It was excusable for Snape to want to treat me more like Lily's son. I imagined, if there were a child who resembled Lily in every way, with eyes exactly like her, I would definitely protect them. I understood completely, so I looked up and met his own gaze frankly. I forced my eyes wide unobtrusively, ensuring they reflected the light clearly. Lily's eyes. I had to get used to this new normal.
After establishing a new positioning, I felt as if a door to a new world had opened. From this day on, there were no more targeted attacks from himself, no more point deductions. Apart from classes, the 2 of us would brew potions in the office with tacit understanding. We coordinated well, passing ingredients, timing the additions. Everything happened without the need for words, understanding each other with just a look. Even though we hadn't had a run-in period, I already felt as if we were old friends of many years. This feeling was very novel and pleasant, at times even surpassing my desire to anger himself into deducting points from Gryffindor, making me linger. Without a doubt, I felt this was the happiest thing since my rebirth. Potter. Snape tapped the desk, signaling me to stop. I kept my head down and didn't react until I had shelled the Abyssinian shrivel fig in my hand and thrown it into the bucket beside me. Only then did I stand up and stretch my sore shoulders.
Do you plan to shell figs all night? Snape was somewhat displeased, his black eyes staring at me coldly. I understood. I took off my glasses, rubbed my brow wearily, and said readily, I understand. I hung my glasses casually on the collar of my robes and bent down to open the cupboard door, intending to take out the bucket of flobberworms. Potter! Snape's voice was filled with anger as he started glaring at me. What is it, Professor Snape? I looked back in puzzlement, corrected myself. Severus? The black-robed man crossed his arms aggressively, but the expression prepared to erupt on his face paused because of this address. It is only Wednesday, and you have almost finished processing this week's ingredients, he hissed in a low voice. Mr. Potter, tell me, do you plan to take pay for nothing for the remaining 4 days? I had a sudden realization. This was clearly within the scope of harshness. I thought for a moment and said calmly, I can help you grade all the assignments. Handwriting is not an issue. I can also organize the Sunday trips to Diagon Alley to select potion ingredients so you don't have to worry about it. Every week, you just need to rest up and wait for the night patrol, Professor Snape. That way I won't be taking pay for nothing, right? As I spoke, I couldn't help but slip into my unique sarcastic tone. Snape's face turned even darker, appearing to suppress a heavy anger. He suddenly drew his wand and tapped the desk sharply with a force that seemed to hold a grudge against the table. A steaming cup of coffee appeared. He glared at it with disdain and moved it aside. He tapped again extremely unceremoniously. This time, a cup of hot cocoa appeared. Snape's expression softened. He waved his wand to float the hot cocoa to me and forced it into my hand, brooking no refusal. Harry Potter. He crossed his arms with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, criticizing even more meanly. Who do you think is the potions professor at Hogwarts? Use your clever little brain to think. Even if you want to apply for this position, you have to wait until graduation at the earliest. Do you have no common sense at all? Seeing me look somewhat astonished, he turned his head away and said coldly, Now, drink your drink quietly, go sit in front of the fireplace and clear those stupid ideas out of your head. Don't make me say it a second time. I don't want to be called by Albus for mistreating a student. The stool I was sitting on began to wobble restlessly, wanting to shake me off. Muddled, I carried the hot cocoa to the sofa in front of the fireplace and sat down. The fire blazing in the fireplace immediately warmed my somewhat cold toes. A warm feeling washed over me, comfortable as lying in hot water, and my sore, numb shoulders and neck seemed to find relief. I turned my head, examining myself with mixed feelings. Snape also looked back at me condescendingly, then lowered his head to continue grading assignments. His expression remained mean and cold, but his look softened slightly, faintly revealing a satisfaction at seeing his demands obediently followed. That glance also held a faint tenderness. My hand trembled again in terror, barely holding the cup steady. I hurriedly put on my glasses and gazed intently, staring fixedly at himself. He was grading assignments with a cold face. It was impossible to tell if the tenderness was real. Was this really a hallucination after Harry Potter contacted Voldemort? My gaze suddenly rested on the glasses in front of my eyes, realizing only then that I hadn't been wearing glasses just now. So, Snape had been looking at these eyes the whole time. Then it wasn't an illusion. After all, that was Lily. My heart settled down immediately. Someone being nice to me, this kind of thing was actually the same as myself being nice to me because of Lily. I stared at the hot cocoa, gripped it a bit tighter, and couldn't help but turn my head again, glancing at Snape seemingly casually. I still had to get used to it slowly.
Time in the second year flowed slowly. Though it felt slow, the end of the term arrived in the blink of an eye. I had almost gotten used to getting along with myself, Snape. Every day was busy, reviewing knowledge I already knew by heart in class, thinking about subsequent plans, helping out in the potions office. Our combined efficiency was simply flying. In between, I dreamt of Voldemort a few more times, which allowed me to keep track of the progress of Voldemort's resurrection. Of course, since Snape also knew about this, I didn't hide the follow-up details from him. Occasionally, this occasionally had become increasingly frequent lately, when I was in a bad mood, I would deliberately provoke himself, trying to deduct some points to vent my anger. But this trick seemed to have lost its effectiveness. Even in class, Snape would just stare at me unfathomably with a straight face, watching me provoke, remaining calm and unmoved, not even engaging in a verbal spar. This left me feeling very helpless, with a stifled feeling like punching cotton, making my mood even worse. This time was no exception. For some unspeakable reason, my mood turned sour again, but provoking Snape only resulted in a breezy detention. "Mr. Potter, come to my office tonight to process toads," Snape said indifferently, not mentioning point deductions at all. Classmates standing around their cauldrons, somewhat dazed by the steam, all looked over. Hermione and Ron couldn't hide the delight on their faces. They clearly thought Professor Snape's attention proved their romance theory. I pursed my lips tightly, avoiding looking at himself, and nodded irritably. No choice left, only one outlet for venting remained: Lockhart. I stirred the liquid in my cauldron, thinking unhappily. Second-year potions were too simple for me. Near the end of the potions lesson, I finished a perfect quality herbicide potion. I packed my school bag first, pulled it out directly, and placed it on the table, then walked to the front of the classroom and handed the glass vial to Snape. I made no attempt to hide my impatience to leave as soon as class was dismissed. Snape took the slender-necked glass vial, held it up for a look, then lowered his head and marked an O on the grade sheet. I turned to leave directly when a lowered, steady, familiar voice sounded from behind. "Potter?" Since Snape used such a low voice, I didn't rashly speak up to ask, just turning back to look at himself with puzzled eyes. The black-robed man looked down at me, his obsidian-like eyes harboring some emotion I couldn't read. His lips were pursed, clutching the potion vial, seemingly wanting to say something, but stopping. I never lacked patience. I quietly returned his gaze, waiting for the words to follow. Snape's cheek twitched before he switched to a sarcastic tone, sneering in a very low voice. Could there actually be something troubling the famous Harry Potter? Don't tell me you're worrying about how to reply to your admirers. No, I denied, somewhat stiffly. I knew very well that Snape asking in this tone was definitely an awkward expression of concern because of my suddenly worsened mood these past few days. This definitely fell into the category of care for Lily's son. Usually, my attitude would improve, and I would play along to help himself out, but now I just felt more irritable. I just suddenly remembered I have something tonight. I made up an excuse to decline. My relationship with Snape had become very pleasant, yet I felt terrible because I wasn't used to his increasingly obvious concern. If it weren't for not being able to use a clemency in front of him, this matter wouldn't have become so troublesome. Come to think of it, Snape seemed not to have used a clemency for a long time either. My thoughts drifted a bit. Something to do tonight? Snape raised an eyebrow, not asking further. He was silent for a few seconds, then turned his head away. His tone remained unmoved and mocking. Then tomorrow night. Remember to make up for tonight's work. I won't be kind enough to pay for an extra day. With this tone, I had thought he wouldn't agree. The current Snape was too easy to talk to. I looked up at the black-robed man with a complex gaze, feeling a bit like one would towards someone failing to meet expectations. Is Harry being scolded again? Ron, who couldn't hear the voices from afar but could see Professor Snape's expression, nudged Hermione beside him and whispered, "I don't think so. This attitude is much better than before. Professor Snape must have really been angered by us. We were punished so miserably that time. Anyway, now that the old bat's attitude has become so good, Harry's romance looks promising. As long as his godfather doesn't come to cause trouble again, I guarantee this has a chance of success," Ron said, patting his chest with relief. Dinner time arrived quickly. A gaunt man wearing a dark green suit, his hair groomed shiny and neat, looking radiant all over, suddenly pushed open the doors of the Great Hall, clutching a large craft paper bag, rushing in with a joyful shout. "Harry!" "Oh no," Ron murmured in despair. Under the gaze of everyone, Sirius went around to the Gryffindor table, came to my side, put his arm around my shoulders, and said cheerfully, "I was discharged from St. Mungo's today. Albus granted special permission for me to see you. Harry, how about it? Are you surprised?" Harry, not really, not surprised. Leave." At the staff table, Dumbledore raised his goblet to Sirius with a benevolent smile. Beside him, Snape's face darkened again, a rare sight lately. "Ronald," Hermione turned her head abruptly in horror and anger. "This really isn't my fault. This is impossible. How could his godfather be discharged today?" Ron stammered an explanation. "Shut up." "Harry!"
Sirius turned and glared with hostility at Snape on the staff table, then lowered his voice and leaned close to my ear to ask, "What happened after that?" I composed myself, calmly put down my cutlery, picked up a plate of ginger biscuits, and casually handed one to Sirius, signaling for them to go outside to talk. Sirius, who hated ginger, said, "Harry, you even remembered that I hadn't had dinner. Touched?" He forced a brilliant smile and took a big bite, sighing emotionally. Hogwarts food still tastes the same." He finished the ginger biscuit in a few bites and took the one I offered again. Who said Sirius Black had no acting skills? I gave Sirius a surprised look, handed him another piece, and said with rare, gentle concern, "Eat more if you miss it." Sirius's expression twisted slightly, but he still patted my hair dotingly and agreed readily. "Okay." Shoulder to shoulder, the enviable godfather and godson walked out eating and chatting. At the staff table, Snape's face was expressionless and tense. He had lost all appetite. After we found a secluded corner in a corridor, I began to explain. I went back on my word midway and said I didn't like Professor Snape anymore because I suddenly thought of some things. Actually, towards Professor Snape, I still... "Some things?" Sirius pressed on, pretending not to hear the second half of my sentence. I nodded, my expression becoming solemn. "Voldemort. Last year, I discovered he was still alive. He is plotting his resurrection at every moment. The boy who lived, the savior who defeated the Dark Lord," Sirius murmured in a daze. "If he resurrects, the first person he'll want to kill is definitely you. Harry, does Dumbledore know about this?" The rest of Sirius's words were blocked by a ginger biscuit. Most of the plate of ginger biscuits had gone into his stomach, and his face was looking a bit green. I calmly stuffed another piece into his mouth and continued on my own. "Even if Voldemort resurrects, I believe in Professor Snape's stance. Professor Dumbledore has been arranging for me to make preparations in secret. The reason I can't say I like Professor Snape anymore is because I can't guarantee whether Voldemort, if he truly resurrects, will know this piece of intelligence and use him." "You mean you don't intend to say it out loud in the future, but you still want to protect him?" Sirius asked with wide eyes in disbelief, his expression turning serious and cold. "Harry, I could barely understand you liking him before, but it's different now. If Voldemort resurrects, even if he has changed for the better, he is a former Death Eater. Liking him will only put you in a dangerous situation." "But I can't control who I like," I lied sincerely with open eyes. "So can you help me when necessary in the future? I still... Some things," Sirius pressed on, pretending not to hear the second half of my sentence. I nodded, my expression becoming solemn. "Voldemort. Last year, I discovered he was still alive. He is plotting his resurrection at every moment. The boy who lived, the savior who defeated the Dark Lord," Sirius murmured in a daze. "If he resurrects, the first person he'll want to kill is definitely you. Harry, does Dumbledore know about this?" The rest of Sirius's words were blocked by a ginger biscuit. Most of the plate of ginger biscuits had gone into his stomach, and his face was looking a bit green. I calmly stuffed another piece into his mouth and continued on my own. "Even if Voldemort resurrects, I believe in Professor Snape's stance. Professor Dumbledore has been arranging for me to make preparations in secret. The reason I can't say I like Professor Snape anymore is because I can't guarantee whether Voldemort, if he truly resurrects, will know this piece of intelligence and use him." "You mean you don't intend to say it out loud in the future, but you still want to protect him?" Sirius asked with wide eyes in disbelief, his expression turning serious and cold. "Harry, I could barely understand you liking him before, but it's different now. If Voldemort resurrects, even if he has changed for the better, he is a former Death Eater. Liking him will only put you in a dangerous situation." "But I can't control who I like," I lied sincerely with open eyes. "So can you help me when necessary in the future? I still want to hear him. Answer once. Just one answer, and I have no other requests."
Sweat broke out on Sirius's forehead. Seeing my hopeful expression, he gritted his teeth and nodded, unable to refuse. I am also a member of the Order of the Phoenix. Actually an organization that fought against Voldemort back then. Harry, I will protect you well, stop his resurrection plan, and I will absolutely not let you be in danger. I finally curved my lips in a smile. My words were actually half true and half false, and my goal was to divert Black's attention to Voldemort so he wouldn't have too much energy to pester me every day. Feeling happy, I stopped fuzzing. I put the plate of gingerbread on the stone steps beside me. I'm not full yet. I'm going to the kitchen to get something. What do you want to eat? I'll go get it. Harry, you wait. Sirius finally breathed a sigh of relief, jumped up immediately, and conveniently took the plate of ginger biscuits with him. After he ran around the corner, I faintly heard the sound of uncontrollable retching. I revealed a vengeful fake smile. That stupid dog got off too easy. I sat on the corridor for a while, gazing aimlessly at the grounds. Suddenly, faint footsteps came from behind me. My gaze sharpened with vigilance, and I reflexively drew my wand, pointing it at the familiar black-robed figure behind me. "When did you come over?" I asked in surprise, slowly lowering my wand. My heart clenched. He twitched the corner of his mouth symbolically and drawled, "Starting from when you mentioned the Dark Lord." He suddenly took a step closer and sneered, "Plan, Potter, what are you plotting behind my back?" I maintained a calm gaze, but felt guilty and unable to explain clearly. I absolutely couldn't mention the previous matters either. Otherwise, with Snape's methods of retaliation, I might not live to see Voldemort. Snape didn't look angry. His calmness seemed to contain some amusement as he continued to mock. "Didn't you tell him? Hard to imagine. So the famous Harry Potter teases his own godfather like this?" I couldn't help but hold my breath. Snape took another step closer. Now the distance between him and me was very close. He looked down into my eyes, very oppressive. A cello-like voice suddenly sounded softly and low in the air. "Potter, your original method would get at most a P from me. And in at most 3 minutes, Black will return." I was a bit confused about what Snape was going to say. Snape stared at me imposingly, a malicious sneer curling on his face. When dealing with Sirius Black, wouldn't using an O method be doing him a disservice? "Do you have another method?" I perked up immediately, disregarding everything else, and asked directly. "Only 1 minute left." Snape didn't answer directly. "I agree." I also revealed a sneer, not losing in momentum. Seeing Sirius's figure carrying a tray appear around the corner not far away, the familiar black-robed figure in front of me suddenly leaned in. The gaunt face became gentle as it magnified before my eyes. With a force pressing the back of my head, my vision was almost enveloped by the wide black robes and an embrace. Those lips, forever mean and cold, finally kissed me gently. Strands of hair from the sides of Snape's face fell onto mine. Those familiar black eyes gazed deeply into mine, seemingly holding an unmoved calm and mockery directed at Sirius, as if this action were merely a plan. "Harry? Okay." In the distance, Sirius, struck as if by lightning and unaware that he had dropped the tray. My Harry!" He suddenly let out a heart-wrenching scream, drew his wand and pouncing towards Snape, leaping and bounding with a face twisted in rage, roaring terribly, "Snivelus, I'm going to kill you!"
The kiss was as light as a cicada's wing. Soft, gentle, and careful, as if Snape were kissing his most precious treasure. These adjectives bore no resemblance whatsoever to Severus Snape, but at this moment I felt this strange amalgamation. That deep, hidden love, as if placing someone wholeheartedly into one's heart, made my own heart tremble slightly. I stood rooted to the spot, looking up in confusion, gazing deeply into those familiar black eyes. But within those black eyes, there was still only unwavering calm and mockery towards Sirius, familiar as ever. My heart suddenly relaxed. I attributed all this to the fact that the person was himself. So even if it was a man kissing me, I didn't feel discomfort or nausea. I felt strategic. He lifted his head expressionlessly, his attitude as indifferent as if the kiss meant nothing at all. Then, he agilely drew his wand, reflexively deflecting a red spell sent by Sirius, while his other hand reached back to pull me behind him, shielding me with one arm. "Snivelous, how dare you insult Harry like this? I'm going to kill you!" Sirius was so angry his face was twisted and livid. He was flinging spells madly. I felt the hand holding me was very steady, protecting me tightly. Warmth spread from the robes to my waist, but it also prevented me from seeing the situation opposite clearly. I tugged at Snape's robes, trying hard to poke my head out, and chimed in knowingly. I was willing just now. Sirius's face instantly became as ugly as if he had eaten a fly. "Snivelous, I'll say it again, let go of Harry." Sirius was both angry and regretful. Don't think just because Harry likes you that you can insult him at will or treat him as something. Don't forget what feelings you had for Lily back then. Shut up. Before Sirius could finish his furious words, Snape interrupted him with sudden rage. The black-robed man's expression twisted terrifyingly. He glared deadly at Black, trying hard to restrain himself from pouncing and fighting. Then, Snape turned his head and gave me a stiff look. Sirius also knew he had misspoken, panting heavily and falling silent. I felt guilty, knowing my shameful thoughts had been hit upon to some extent. That person was also himself. This matter shouldn't be known by the identity of Harry Potter. I lowered my eyelids, standing still and observing my nose and heart. How could I defend him? Damn Black! The atmosphere in the corridor suddenly turned cold, awkward, and solidified. "Harry," Sirius called out softly, somewhat uneasy. Snape looked at me, his face still contorted. He had no defense for the past, but he wasn't treating little Potter like this because of Lily. Snape stood stiffly on the spot with a complex expression, not knowing how to explain. "What is it, Professor Snape?" I responded, with a question. "I'm going back. You guys continue," I said in a low voice, turning and walking decisively towards the castle without looking at the two of them again. Putting myself in the other's shoes, I thoughtfully left myself time to cool down. Snape took a hurried step forward, subconsciously wanting to call me back, but he couldn't say anything, only pursing his lips tightly with complex emotions, watching me leave. Sirius shouted guiltily and hurriedly chased after me. "Harry, wait for me!" From a distance, one could still hear Black's desperate explanations and stammering apologies. "Harry, actually, it's not like what you heard." Snape stood alone in the corridor, watching the backs of the two shrink and blur until they entered the castle. After a long time, Snape finally explained dryly in an almost inaudible voice. "The person I like isn't." Snape stood there with sudden realization, a gleam flashing in his black eyes. That night, I returned early to the Gryffindor dormitory. I found a package under my pillow. "What is this?" I picked it up. Harry Potter was scrawled on the package as illegibly as ever. Tearing open the package, scattered red phoenix feathers, curved horns, some white seeds, and several well-preserved basilisk fangs appeared before my eyes. My eyes widened abruptly. This time I was truly stunned. Combining memories from my previous life, these things were the most cherished batch of ingredients in Snape's collection at this age. Heaven knew how hard it was to pluck feathers from Fox. But now Snape had actually sent them all to me? Has Snape gone mad again? I stared silently at the phoenix feathers for a long while. I swore on my 38 years as Snape that my character was definitely not one to give away my most beloved potion ingredients on a silver platter. No, I couldn't figure out his motivation this time. I threw the ingredients back on the bed, glaring at them with a headache. What on earth was he thinking? Was it hush money? No. Was it compensation? Even less likely. Or was it because Snape had always protected me as an existence more like Lily, and today Black hit the nail on the head, he decided not to hide it anymore?
My expression fluctuated, my face darkening, a vague anger and irritability rising in my heart. Feeling my temper flaring inexplicably again, I pushed aside the bed curtains, got out of bed, and walked into the bathroom. It was already evening, and Ron was showering inside. Hearing the noise, he turned around and shrieked in fright. "Harry, why did you come in suddenly? I locked the door." I wasn't in the mood to look at the red-haired boy's beanpole figure. I walked straight to the mirror above the sink and stared at myself. Those green eyes were as familiar as ever, but now that green was as dull as a pool of stagnant water, deep and strange. Mate?" Ron covered himself awkwardly. "What's wrong?" I stared deeply into those eyes. I blinked at the mirror to let the light reflect in. I stared intently, and in a flash, I saw that moving green light up again. There was nothing wrong with liking Lily. After all, Lily was so wonderful, worthy of anyone's affection. "I'm fine," I answered concisely. Having resolved my internal conflict, I turned and walked out, putting away the ingredients with satisfaction. Ron stood in the bathroom stunned for a long time, creeped out by my behavior. He hurriedly dried off and chased after me. Harry?" Ron swallowed, asking even more worriedly. "Mate, but you look... Are you feeling unwell somewhere? Or did Snape say something to you again?" I ignored him. I was lying on the bed, absent-mindedly calculating where to hide these precious ingredients. Things that entered my hands wouldn't be spat out again like the current Snape. The next evening, avoiding the pestering Black, I resignedly took the bag of precious ingredients and went awkwardly to the potions office in the dungeons. With a crash, I dumped the ingredients onto Snape's large desk and stood straight. The black-robed man grading homework paused his quill, raised his eyelids to look at me expressionlessly, questioning in his black eyes. I pursed my lips tightly, struggling not to speak. Snape clenched his quill unobtrusively and asked, "What is it?" His gaze swept blandly over the ingredients on the desk. He noted the flaws. The phoenix feathers were plucked, not perfectly intact. The basilisk fangs weren't of the best quality either. Snape frowned imperceptibly and moved his gaze back to the boy. "Has Professor Snape's excellent memory forgotten that I am only a second-year student this year?" I asked through gritted teeth, emphasizing second year. Snape raised an eyebrow. "With my current magic, I can't brew such high-level potions yet, and these ingredients won't keep until then. So I still have to thank Professor Snape for his kindness." I smiled through gritted teeth. "These ingredients are better left with the potions professor to be put to good use. The bag I kept before is enough for me." Snape's heart settled back down. He believed I was only returning the ingredients out of practical concern, fear of waste. "Professor Snape, why did you send them to me?" I pressed. He probed slowly. "Yesterday." I fell silent, then immediately chimed in tactfully. "I know. You were my mother's good friend." The black-robed man frowned even tighter. His fingers gripping the quill began to tighten. He was unhappy. I had confirmed his deepest fear, that I thought his affection was based only on Lily. Trying hard to suppress the anger in his voice, he said coldly, "Don't listen to Black's nonsense." He couldn't explain himself clearly, but the truth wasn't what Black said. The reason he liked me wasn't. He wouldn't blaspheme Lily and little Potter like that. The boy stood silently without reaction, but his expression looked disbelieving. Snape felt both angry and powerless, hating Black to the core. He spoke recklessly, blurting out icily, "I used to be thoroughly disgusted seeing the elder Potter's face. Harry, why on earth do you think I kissed you?" I opened my mouth to refute, but suddenly froze. Professor Snape, what did you call me?" Snape snapped out of his daze, realizing he had misspoken. He restrained himself, pressing his lips together tightly, turning his head away coldly without saying a word. After a moment of silence, he said coldly again, "Nothing." I still stared at him vacantly and confusedly, my brain whirring, thinking rapidly. I could only murmur incredulously for confirmation, "Professor Snape?" But that answer was too bizarre. I preferred Snape to tell me another believable answer, like the kiss was purely about spite for Black. Snape felt extremely unnatural under that persistent gaze. He frowned, wanting to end this quickly. Potter, I won't mistake you for anyone else. Don't let your imagination run wild, and don't listen to Black's nonsense. In the dim potions office, no one spoke for a moment. Little Potter still stared at him vacantly, standing motionless in front of the desk, looking somewhat helpless and lost in thought, persistently waiting for an answer he had longed for too long. Snape compromised. All right, listen. He knew I didn't have much time left. Was he unwilling to say even a single reassuring sentence? Snape raised his gaze, staring complicatedly at the boy. His voice, usually velvety and smooth, was now unnatural and extremely dry. His words were squeezed out with difficulty. Harry, would you be willing to move in with me after graduation? I had heard that address clearly. I twitched the corner of my mouth in disbelief, trembling slightly, remaining silent. Snape's attitude was getting weirder and weirder. He had feelings for Harry Potter himself? Even though I wore the elder Potter's face and Lily's eyes, he could ignore these and really only have feelings for Harry Potter? I could only answer rationally based on the facts. I won't live until after graduation. Snape was naturally aware of this. His hand resting on his leg clenched silently, but his facial expression remained unchanged. What if I find a way? I was stunned. The fact that Snape had feelings for Harry Potter was too much of a shock to me. But putting that aside, didn't I also want to live tacitly with himself? We brew potions together and split the research results equally. I stated my conditions, calmly, rationalizing the living arrangement as a professional partnership. Agreed, Snape accepted, adding, "You have the right to use everything." A gleam of joy almost lit up in his black eyes. Then he barely managed to use occlumency to restrain himself from acting like a giddy young man, simply softening his brow and pursing his lips reservedly. Same for my things, I paused, then said the same. Another flash of softness passed through Snape's eyes. He drew his wand and tapped the desk. 2 steaming drinks appeared on the desk immediately, coffee and cocoa. I stopped hiding and unceremoniously chose the cup of coffee. Snape was somewhat surprised, but said nothing. He tapped the desk again, changing the cup of hot cocoa into coffee as well, and quietly transfigured the hard stool I usually sat on into a cushioned one. We held our coffee, drinking tacitly and quietly. For a time, the office fell into silence again. Only this time, Snape's heart fell into a rare tranquility and peace. He would realize now. The features he loathed or liked faded away, and what gradually became distinct was the boy himself. He would rejoice. I gazed at the slowly swaying coffee in the cup. Snape was very clear now. This boy was not his new salvation, not a ray of light in his dark life, but his past and future. I felt a very faint, gentle smile appear at the corner of my pursed lips. Final exams arrived quickly. The second-year subjects were a breeze for me. After finishing, I handed in my papers without batting an eye. I pushed open the door of the exam hall expressionlessly, straightened my back, and strode away with my robes billowing. I looked so much like Professor Snape that Professor Flitwick, the proctor, couldn't help shaking his head. I walked further and further away from the exam hall, unsurprised by the scene I had just glimpsed. Most of the Gryffindor students looked miserable. I held a mean and caustic attitude, without any pity, towards those students who usually only thought about playing and started to make an effort just before exams. These little brats had loads of time to squander, but didn't know how to fill their empty heads with a bit of knowledge. Thinking mean thoughts, I walked out the main door. These 2 days were exam days. The corridors were silent. I thought for a moment, then turned and headed down the stairs, striding towards the dungeons I knew so well. The potions classroom was here. Further in was Snape's office. The large doors of the potions classroom were tightly shut. Undoubtedly, a year group was taking their potions exam inside. I didn't stop, but walked straight to the door of the potions office. "It is Master Harry, welcome," the Medusa on the door hissed before I could speak. Then, with a click, the door slid open inward. "Don't call me Little Master," I said reluctantly. still having a headache over what ideas Snape had instilled in Medusa after that day. It always sounded a bit weird. "Yes, Master Harry," Medusa corrected herself readily, her stone-colored vertical pupils looking at me brightly. I felt it was even weirder. I simply ignored such trivial matters and swept into the office. The lights in the dark office lit up in response. I flicked my wand, and the blazing fire in the fireplace went out. The weather was getting hotter now. Keeping the fire burning would make it too warm. I was long accustomed to this environment. I walked to the bookshelf on my own, picked out a heavy, thick book, and took it out. Since that day, Snape had opened everything in the office to me: rare books, precious ingredients, or any potion in the cupboard. Since things were out in the open, I felt at ease and didn't think anything was wrong. All this had originally been mine anyway, and I used it very handily. I carried the thick book to the desk and sat down, took out the ink and quill Snape was accustomed to using from a drawer, pulled out a few blank sheets of parchment, dipped the quill in ink, and opened the book. This ordinary-looking encyclopedia of potions actually had a spell cast between its covers. Inside were Snape's research results on the improvement of many potions and spells, all unfinished. I knew most of the things here were successfully researched by me later in my previous life. Wasting my precious time repeating things that already existed was particularly unwise. I thought to myself, lowered my head, and began to write furiously. Time ticked by, and unknowingly it was time for dinner again. The door made a soft sound. Snape was back. He stood very straight, striding into his office with a cold face and billowing robes. Only after the door closed did a trace of exhaustion appear on his face. Hearing the commotion, I looked up keenly. Seeing who it was, I relaxed and lowered my head to continue writing. Snape was stunned for a moment. He hadn't expected little Potter to be in his office, boldly sitting in his seat writing something. Snape walked over unobtrusively without saying anything, just lowering his gaze to examine it. But the more he looked, the more his relaxed expression became grave again, and his astonishment grew. He picked up the stack of parchment with ink not yet dry, read through it roughly and quickly, and asked in a low voice, unable to hide his shock, "Did you research this in the future?" "We did," I corrected him. Snape paused, his eyes softening considerably, and nodded almost imperceptibly. He stood by the table, lowered his head, and started reading again. He read hungrily. Strands of hair by his face fell down, obscuring most of his expression, but his black eyes could be seen shining under the lamplight. When I looked up, I saw the silly look he had when encountering something he liked. Since growing up, he rarely had such a look. If Snape was happy, I was naturally happy too. I looked up and gazed quietly at my own expression, a faint smile appearing at the corner of my mouth. I lowered my head and continued to immerse myself fully in the research. Although Snape was back, meaning it was dinner time, this didn't matter to me. What was eating? I irresponsibly ignored my stomach rumbling a few times, feeling at peace. Snape, who should have been deaf to thunder, was suddenly jolted awake from the world of research. He put down the parchment, frowned, and looked at me hesitantly. Potter, what do you want to eat?" Snape asked hissingly and unnaturally. He kept a straight face, showing the cold expression he wore in class, pretending to ask casually, as if he didn't care. The hypocrisy. In the past, even if the boy ate here, Snape ordered the food completely. Little Potter had no room to choose. But now, out of some sentiment, Snape began to care about details he never paid attention to before. I didn't realize anything was wrong. I barely lifted my head from the parchment and subconsciously said with a small part of my mind, "Bread, steak, and coffee will be fine." Exactly the same again. The corner of Snape's mouth couldn't help but curve into a fleeting arc of pleasure. He straightened his face back to a normal expression, drew his wand, and tapped the desk to summon the house elf to order. Then Snape became a bit troubled again, his brows furrowing deeply. Did little Potter love to eat these, or did he eat them because Snape loved them? Or was it just to keep things simple while busy writing? Snape, whose mind was always sharp, couldn't reach a conclusion recently no matter what. He couldn't help but mull it over repeatedly in his heart, becoming even more tangled and suspicious. Having never been in a relationship, he felt his methods in this regard were too clumsy. He just wanted to know what little Potter liked. How could this be so difficult?